Hello there, guys. I'm so excited to be filming today a let's go through all of my notes about Anathem by Neal Stephenson. Now, it's been a while since I filmed one of these, but I actually did go back through all these notes again. So I don't know how many times I've read this book now. Like, I haven't read every word 3 times, but I've read parts of it like 3 or more times now. So, and I still feel like I'm still wrapping my head around it. It's a very profound book, and I'm really looking forward to the day when I can just reread the whole thing. But that today is not today. Today we're going to go through all of my notes. I'm so excited. This is definitely one of my favorite books of 2025. We did a read along of this. And I think it's Tiffany's and Stephanie's channel is where you'll find those live shows. So I will link them in the description down below in case you want to go check out our live shows about Anathem. But without further ado, let's jump into it. I'm so excited. Okay. My first note. I did take out certain notes actually as I was going through it again that were like, I don't know. Do you guys need to know that? That's kind of like a piddly thing. Okay, first note. It's not a note. Some of them I've just marked a passage because it seemed significant to me. All right, Quinn finally said. I never thought of it like this, but now that you mention it, we have 3 systems. This is talking about the types of government that exist on Earth outside of the maths. So maybe I'll do a little introduction to what this book is about, so that you guys know what I'm talking about. This video is probably more for people who aren't planning to read it. I mean, I don't think it really matters, honestly. I mean, there's some things that'll be spoiled in this video if you've never read the book. But I just feel like you probably won't understand it very well if you've never read the book. But I'll introduce it a little bit in case you're just trying to check out the book. Hear a little more about it. Maybe I can convince you to read it because I loved it. I'm not going to recommend it to everybody though, because 2 of our co-hosts had very middling thoughts about it and absolutely would have DNF'd it if it wasn't a read along. So 3 of our co-hosts, excuse me. So only 2 of the co-hosts loved it, but we really loved it. It's Rich's favorite book, and I gave it 5 stars. This is my first time going through it. Well, I read it my first time this year, and then I reread most of it, and then I went back through my notes the 3rd time, and now we're going to go through it again. So Anathem is about men and women who are locked in these secular monasteries, which are called maths on this world. This is not set on Earth, but there are a lot of similarities to Earth for reasons that will be explained. So if you're just thinking this is just a ripoff of Earth, why isn't it just set on Earth, which was a thought I had when I was first reading it, there's a lot of things that we have on Earth, but they're under different names, like G-Jaw means cell phone, for example. There's a reason why there are similarities to Earth, and it's part of the complex argument that's made by this book. I don't know that this book really has a moral argument. I guess I would have to think about it more, but it definitely has a scientific argument. It has a philosophical argument that it's making. And I understood that despite not being a terribly scientific person. I'm definitely, is it left brain that's very literature focused? I'm very left brain. So basically people get locked up in these maths and they can choose whether they want to do a year locked up in a math, 10 years locked up in a math, or I think 100 years or 1,000 years. And so you can choose, basically, am I ever going to go out and see the rest of the world again? The rest of the world is kind of like a dystopia. Everybody is fed antidepressants in their food. Technology has kind of broken down. There's ruins everywhere. Everybody just kind of, there's a lot of religious cults kind of populating the land. A lot of confusion over explanations of things. However, for reasons that are explained later in the book, these smart people have been locked up in the maths, and they're only allowed to come out at certain specific times of the year. And so what is happening here is it's right before one of those specific times called Appert, where the people that are locked up in the maths can come outside into the rest of the world and interact with other people. So currently, there is an artisan from outside of the math who has been brought into the math to do some fixes. I don't remember the exact fix, but he's an artisan. His name is Artisan Quinn. And so he is being interviewed by a Fra, which is like the name for a person who lives in a math, Fra Erasmus, and Fra Erasmus's teacher named Fra Orlo. So Fra Orlo and Erasmus are interviewing Quinn about the political developments out in the world since the last Appert. So that's what this discussion is. So Quinn is saying there are actually 3 systems of government currently out in the world. And so they are learning about, because the systems of government change. When you have a system, I don't know, it's probably like 8,000 years of recorded history or something. We're in this book. So it's like, if we have, I don't know, how long do we have of recorded history? Do we have 3,000 years of recorded history on Earth? So imagine if we had 8,000. That's what this book is doing. It's like imagining 8,000 years of recorded history. So given how long these maths have been in existence, the secular government has changed a lot, like over those 8,000 years. I'm just like, it might not be like exactly 8,000 years, but that's my guesstimate. And so they just sort of lose track. They're not interested in the political or the religious governments that arise in the outside world. So, but they keep track of it, but they don't they're not like poli-sci majors, they don't follow every shift in the wind. They're like, oh, what's happened in the last 10 years? Because this is every 10-year math. I forget what they call it, decenniary or something like that. So Fra Orlo and Fra Erasmus belong in a 10-year math. So every 10 years, they're allowed to go out and see the rest of the world. Okay, moving on to the next tab. I don't think all of my thoughts will be that long. Bayesian architecture was a cousin to Mathic, broad and rounded, where ours was narrow and pointy. So I think I marked this because there is, I wasn't sure what was important when I was first going through it, and I wouldn't say that the architecture is something that really stands out throughout the book. However, there are a lot of descriptions. And so it is kind of fun. I think the world building is very detailed about certain things. And it feels like he has really thought out the different, the specific thing in a sci-fi world or in a fantasy world. An author knows what are like the 3 things, say, for example, that I'm going to go really hard on. I'm going to develop really, really in depth. And if you don't choose what things you're going to go really in depth on, a book can be this size and very diffuse. And so I don't think that architecture is one of the things that he goes in really in depth, but he definitely has like a thought. There's like schools of thought that he has recognized in architecture over the ages. And I think the whole point of that is to show how much time has passed and how things have changed over the course of time. So, and I think it also shows Bayesian architecture versus Mathic architecture. It shows what is emphasized in different maths, because every math is characterized by an emphasis on certain things. So certain maths, they have different like rules than other maths. They have different ways they bend the rules. They interpret the rules than other maths. They study different things. They have certain schools of thought. They follow different teachers. They call them savants throughout history. So every math is really different. And even within the math, all of these different all of the different Fras have different theories that they subscribe to. And they belong to different groups. They decide when they're young adults, okay, which group am I going to go into and make this my field of study, basically. So Their whole job when Frogs are in the maths is to study something about the world and develop like the physics or how to create better technology out of it. They're very technologically advanced inside the maths. They're so technologically advanced that the rest of the world locked them in here because they were like, well, we don't want to have to try and keep up with all of your technological advances, and we want to still be able to use our stuff. You guys are too advanced for us at this point, and we're not interested anymore. So, an interesting theory about the persecution of scientists, which is a theme in sci-fi. The poor scientists were so persecuted. That is definitely a theme in sci-fi. But honestly, I totally lapped it up. It was so good in this book. Okay. Why can't you talk to the Ida? She asked, suddenly irritated. It's stupid. Some of them are very intelligent. Yes, so there are certain groups within the maths that can't talk to each other. There's like we can't confer with each other. And the Ida, I think, is one of those because they are expert spies and they know what's going on in the outside world. And unless it's Appert or around an Appert, you're not supposed to try and find out what's happening in the outside world. You're just supposed to focus on your studies, developing your technology, developing whatever line of theory and inquiry interests you. And so you're not supposed to be distracted by what's going on in the rest of the world. But the Ida, that's kind of their job. They always know what's going on because they're spies. So they're not allowed to talk to the Ida in this math. Frogs were kept sterile by substances in our food so that we could not impregnate sewers and breed a species of more intelligent humans inside the consents. Genetically, we are all cut from the same cloth. This is interesting. Genetically, we're all cut from the same cloth. I don't see why that's true because they bring people in from the outside world. So they're not all the same genetics. They're actually different genetics. So I'm not sure I understand that comment. However, okay, two things. Sewers are the female version of Fra and Sewer. As far as I recall. There is an index in the back of this book. And I didn't know that for my first read of the book. And so for the second read, and as I was going through my notes, I made liberal use of the glossary to look up what different words mean. So maybe I'll just look up sewer and read it to you guys just to be sure we're getting our terms here. Sewer is a female avowed. Avowed is the gender neutral term. Okay, the other thing is, frogs are kept sterile by substances in our food. So part of their being controlled and herded into these maths by the rest of the world who's afraid of them is, we don't want you guys to breed. So just like there's antidepressants in the food of the rest of the world, there are sterilizing agents in the food of people who live in the maths to keep them from breeding a super smart genetic line of people, I guess. Why? What is the point? Who came up with all these stupid rules? What were they afraid of? This is a good question that I had when I was first reading the book. Why are there all these crazy rules? You do eventually get some answers. But there's not a lot of things. There's certain things that you don't get answers to as well. And if that's going to drive you crazy, I'm just going to let you know you're not going to get all of the answers. But I think you get it. To me, it was enough. It was enough. There were certain things that I was like, I would have loved to know more. I would have loved if the book explored this. But this book is already so long. How can I be like, tell me more? There's no room for more. He had a vision for this book. It was fascinating, completely fascinating. It was 1,000 pages and it was enough. I didn't need any more. There were things that I would have, if I was writing the book, there are certain things I would have written in there that he didn't, but it's not my book. He wrote it. So that's fine. Okay. The things he is interested in, we will get there. Literally 2,000 years ago, Assant put forth the idea that every idea the human mind could come up with has already been come up with by that time. It's a very influential idea. So they even have the last idea recorded by Saint Laura. So that was an interesting thought to me. That was one clue. You're just kind of thrown in when you first start this book. You have no idea what's going on. There's a lot of terms you don't know. There's like similarities to Earth, but there's like wild differences too. I didn't realize how old this world was. I didn't realize how old this civilization and society were. That was one of my clues. There is nothing new under the sun, as Solomon wrote. But there really have been new things under the sun since Solomon wrote those words. And what they're saying is there really is nothing new under the sun, because we've been around for 6 centuries when that was written, of recorded history. So pretty interesting thought there. That's how old the civilization is. So somebody asked, what have we all been doing in here for the last 2100 years then, since the last idea was come up with? Not everybody agrees that there's nothing new under the sun, apparently. There are certain ideas that are like pretty widely held among the intellectual elite in this book. That is one of them. And there's several others, and they are listed in the glossary. There's like basically Occam's razor. They all are like, yeah, Occam's razor. That's true. Which is interesting, because that's obviously not something everybody believes here on Earth. In fact, I'm definitely not somebody who believes that. In fact, I usually think the truth is more complex than we understand. To me, it seems like everything worth knowing is really complex and hard to understand. And it's more complicated than you would think when you first look at it. That's something I learned through story writing. When I have a writing idea, it covers maybe like probably 3 or 4 scenes at most. But when you're first writing your story idea, you're like, oh yeah, I have the whole idea in my head. I just have to keep writing it down. But really, it's only a couple really important scenes. And then you have to come up with the rest of the book. That's how complicated it is. So, anyway, there are other ideas too, though. Like, most of them don't believe in God. That was one that's like, okay, but most people do believe in God on Earth. So, or they are religious in some way. So that doesn't seem like it's true in America or in Europe. People who live here don't think that, but honestly, Westerners are a very minute portion of the population. We are the elite with most of the money, but the rest of the world has many more people, and most of them are religious. So, pretty interesting. Of course, these elite, they go the way of atheism, because that tends to be what happens when you're among the elite. You tend to go the way of atheism. So, pretty interesting. Apparently, Neal Stephenson is part of that. So it's awfully hard to see how they could maintain a consistent strategy over 4 millennia. From our point of view, it changes so often, we don't even bother keeping track, except around Appert. You could think of this place as a zoo for people who just got tired of paying attention to it. So what this is saying is, the maths are a zoo for people who do not care about the political science of the changes of power in the rest of the world. We don't care. That's not what we're interested in. And so we all go in these maths and mind our business, basically. Pretty interesting. The people who are nerds about poli-sci, they do not go into this math. That is not, there's probably a place for them, I guess. It would be a different kind of power dynamic that they're exploring, though. It wouldn't be like what the rest of us are looking at. These people are not, they are not going into the maths to sway wide swaths of people rhetorically, and, you know, they do argue for their positions, of course, but it's your reach is limited because the majority of people do not live in maths, and they're the only people who are going to hear you talking. So, but you do see redders, as they're called, later in the book, which is a really fun element. I can't wait to get there. Oh, I just realized I'm not wearing my rings. I had them on earlier. Okay, we skirted a wedge. Oh, I just realized there was like a note that I didn't read earlier. This is on the one about frogs and sewers being kept sterile. The best way really is to make yourself available and answer endless questions. Wow, I don't think that's part of this book. Sorry. That was, I think, from some other book. Okay. But I have a note on this one too. So, okay. Sometimes I do reuse my flags. Sorry. I think when I started going through my flags, I didn't realize that I was going to be filming this video. So anyways, later on though, I definitely knew that I was going to film this video. So we skirted a wedge-shaped slab of red stone carved all over with the names of the frauds and sewers whose remains lay underneath it. It was our policy not to talk about this unless someone asked. Today, no one did, and so a lot of awkwardness was avoided. So this is after Appert has begun, and Fry Rasmus is giving a tour to people who live outside of the maths, who have come into their 10-year math to learn about the kind of intellectual ideas that are happening there and the history of it and such. I just love it when he does these dumps of like, yeah, something interesting happened here, but I'm not going to explain it all right here. Because it makes me so curious. That's why I kept reading on. I felt like he was just leading me on and on with certain things. And it definitely, like, he answered a lot of that. So I was satisfied with the answers we got. So much inherent history and something story. Love it. That was my note. Sorry, I couldn't read my handwriting entirely. But yeah, lots of world building. Lots of thought in the world building. I think I missed one. Okay. This was both a good reason not to die and a hint that death might not be everything. I knew I was perilously close to Diolator territory now, but because people could be so beautiful, it was hard not to think that there was something of people that came from the other world that Nuus had seen through the clouds. That was like the one instance where he acknowledged, I feel like maybe God could exist. There could be something more than what is physically here right now. There could be something beyond the material world. So yeah, I marked that because I was like, oh, nice. Okay, there was one of those thoughts. Maybe there would be more. There isn't. There aren't more. That was the extent of it. He didn't follow that train of thought anywhere. Okay. I actually really thought that in this book, we were going to follow that train of thought more. Like, there's something that happens later in the book, and we'll get to it. And I'm like, you could have asked and learned about that. Why didn't you? Okay. In my opinion, these two sculptures were such bald pro-Hylea, anti-Deot propaganda that I was almost embarrassed by them. The Diolaters, however, seemed to take precisely the opposite view. Over the course of Appert, Deot's pedestal had become bedizened with so many candles, charms, flowers, stuffed animals, fetishes, photographs of dead people, and slips of paper that the one-offs would be cleaning it up for weeks after the gate closed. So Deot and Hylea are two of the founding sort of thoughts of started with these two. There's like an origin myth, basically, and I think they're sisters. I'm trying to remember everything. Yeah, two sisters, Hylea and Deot, are twins, and the Diolaters who believe in God follow Deot, and Hyleans who follow Hylea, I guess, don't believe in God. I don't remember the exact thing that separates them out, but the Hylean theoric world is something that gets talked about a lot in this book. Maybe I should read that in the glossary for you, because that's like a huge school of thought that gets explored in this book. It's like really, really important. The Hylean theoric world is the name used by most adherents of protism to denote the higher plane of existence, populated by perfect geometric forms, theorems, and other pure ideas, called Kanoans. So it's like a theorical world. It's like a cloud where everybody can access the ideas in this Hylean theoric world, basically. But it gets way more into it as the story goes on. Okay, this story explains so much why Diolaters are believers in God and why the concept put forward by Anathem is called the Hylian Theoric world, but the difference still escapes me. So basically what I just said, I still struggle a little bit. I probably need to reread the story like 14 more times. Okay, I'm super thirsty. I need some water, sorry. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay. Dyax. This is another statue that our Fra Erasmus, he's our main character, by the way, that we're following from his perspective this entire book. He is showing the tour another statue, and this one is of Dyax. He was famous for his disciplined thought. He became more and more distressed by the way Orithina was being infiltrated by enthusiasts. Those were people who misunderstood how the Orithenians used numbers. They dreamed up all kinds of crazy number-worshipping stuff. One day, Dyax was coming out of the temple after the singing of the Anathem when he saw these guys casting fortunes using dice. He was so furious that he grabbed a rake from a gardener and used it to drive the enthusiasts out of the temple. After that, he ran the place. He coined the term theorics, which is basically like science. Science that results in like the making of technology. And his followers called themselves theors. Pretty much everybody who lives in a math would call themselves a theor. I think that's like one of the pillars. To distinguish themselves from the enthusiasts. Okay, there are probably some enthusiasts, but Dyax said something that is still very important to us, which is that you should not believe a thing only because you like to believe it. We call that Dyax's rake. And sometimes we repeat it to ourselves as a reminder not to let subjective emotions cloud our judgment. So I know that there is a name for this idea on Earth as well. We have a name for this, not just believing. Maybe, is it, I don't know. It's something about being a scientist. You can't just follow your feelings or believe in something because you want it to be true. You have to have evidence of it. So science obviously explores what can be known physically, the material world, whereas religion explores what can't be like proven with numbers and, data. It can't be tested in a lab. What people who have faith believe in can't be tested in a lab. So while science handles the material world, and scientists are like, we're not going to believe in something just because we want to. Faith is like, even though there isn't really a conflict between faith and science. There doesn't have to be. You can believe in both because they're talking about different things entirely. However, people do have faith, and some scientists do have faith. Absolutely, they do. But I think people who are religious, they have to acknowledge the humility of their position, which is we don't know everything and we can't know everything. I'll be right back. I need to turn on the air conditioning. Okay, we're back. Let's keep moving. It's just that with all that's been going on with the Warden of Heaven, we were speculating as we were on our way here whether the Avowed were feeling any pressure to change their views. And we wondered if your take on Deat and Hylea might have reflected some secular influence. So this is Fra Erasmus being questioned on his telling of the story of Deat and Hylea by some people that he just thinks are pilgrims at the time. He's like, there's maybe something weird going on here, but he does not know who these people are, and he's about to find out. But basically, he's like, I just found out about the Warden of Heaven, who is like the current power on Earth in the secular world outside of the maths. He's like, I'd never actually heard of that guy until like 3 days ago. So, yeah, my take on Deat and Hylea had nothing to do with the Warden of Heaven, basically. So, okay. Moving on. That's why Appert took place now. It was a way for those inside the math to share their good fortune with their neighboring extramuros, as well as to relieve them of any babies not likely to survive the winter. So extramuros means people who don't live in maths, so the secular world. And so Appert is an opportunity for a mingling of the two cultures. The outside world can learn about what theorics are being developed in the maths, and they can hand over their babies to become a member of a math. They can hand off their children to be trained. And those children don't necessarily become a Fra or a Sur. However, they have that option if they are accepted into the program, so to speak. Okay, moving on. You mean it's like a different planet? Dath asked. That's an interesting way of looking at it. Most of us don't think it's another planet in the sense of speculative fiction spiely. Maybe it's the future of this world. So they are talking about the Hylian theoric world, but they haven't given it a name yet, I don't think, at this point. Maybe it's the future of this world, the Hylian theoric world, the place of perfect geometry and all the forms. Is it Plato's forms? Aristotle's forms? I think it's Plato. I think Plato in the cave with the shadow. I don't know. Anyway, you'll have to ask Rich. But yeah, they're like theorizing. Maybe it's the future of this world, maybe it's an alternate universe we can't get to, or maybe it's nothing but a fantasy. But at any rate, it lives in our souls and we can't help striving for it. Yeah. Then, so my note, yes, Hylian theoric world again. Beautiful explanation. He's very kind. So this is Archibald describing, I guess, he's trying to describe... He's trying to describe this concept to somebody who is not part of the math, which I just feel like they can't be really familiar with. It's like teaching somebody who doesn't have the same set of shared concepts. But I wrote, that was very kind, the way he explained it. But to be honest with you, the characters, I can't really tell them apart at all. So if you asked me to tell you anything else about Archibald, I would say, I can't, sorry. Okay, moving on. Can they infest humans as well? Really? I was only joking. Well, how would we be able to tell if that had already happened? So, I marked this because originally when I was reading it, I was like trying to figure out, what is this book actually gonna be about? I can't tell. And I was like, is this going to be about a plague? Is there going to be some kind of plague? Yeah, so I wrote, I'm looking so hard at this. And then my second note, as I was going through it again, I was like, lol, it has nothing to do with this. Okay. 3 Fras and 2 Surs sang a 5-part motet while 12 others milled around in front of them. Actually, they weren't milling, it just looked that way from where we sat. Each one of them represented an upper and lower index in a theoretical equation involving certain tenors and a metric. As they moved to and fro, crossing over one another's paths and exchanging places while traversing in front of the high table, they were acting out a calculation on the curvature of a 4-dimensional manifold, involving various steps of symmetrization, anti-symmetrization, and the raising and lowering of indices. So there's a really strong musical element to the maths and the thoughts that are going on there. And I think that's accurate. Music has a mathematical quality. You can't play music like it's mathematical, like it's robotic. You have to play it with life and fire. However, the reason you practice music so much before you perform it is so that you could do it in your sleep, you know? So there is like, so this dance that they're talking about, is this a dance? It sounds like they're dancing and singing. And it's really interesting. They develop music in these maths to be in alignment with their beliefs. just like a religious monastery would here on earth. They develop these songs in alignment with their beliefs. And a lot of times the songs themselves are very calculated to give glory to God and other things. So they do the same thing, but they're giving glory to not God. It's like glorifying their mathematical theorems and stuff like that. Pretty interesting. And so this was page 145, and this was the point when I decided, I think I love this book. This is when it was like going from like 3-star, this is okay, but I might DNF it, to like 4-star. I think I love this. It's been a very long time since I read a book this long with my eyes. And that's true. I don't read this long of books very often anymore, not with my eyes. And I read this entire book with my eyes. The first time through, I listened to a lot of it. And so the second time through, when I was, my reread, if you will, was entirely with my eyes, like immersion reading it. When I was just listening, it was a 3-star book. When I was immersion reading, it was a 5-star book, is what I found about this book. That was my experience of it. And I think that's just because I could follow the ideas so much better with my eyes. When I was listening, there was just a lot that went like way over my head. There's certain things that I can listen to, like human interest stories, romance, things like that. I can follow pretty well on audio because my emotions are engaged. This one, it was like mind engaged. There was emotions, like I was excited while I was trying to figure out the ideas that he was writing down. I felt like I was learning, and it was interacting. It just made me really think in a different way. And that's, I think, why I like sci-fi. It just like tickles the right part of my brain. And so it's at page 145 out of 1000 that I had decided that on my first time reading this book. So maybe you'd be able to tell by page 145 if you really love it. That's around where Victoria DNF'd it. One of our co-hosts, it was around like 150, page 150. So I think that's actually about right. You know, if you've read 150 pages of this and you're like, I really don't like it, you might not like it. I would say try to give it to like page 200. But I did know by 150. So yeah. And I think probably my other friends who gave it maybe like a 3-star sort of rating, they also probably would have DNF'd it before page 200. So I think you'll know if it tickles the right part of your brain or not. You will know. Okay, this model of another person's body that was in his mind and in my mind, but also seemingly in a third place, a shared space. Yes, that's what it felt like. It freaked me out for a little while, but then I put it out of my mind because I thought I was just being weird. Well, it's been freaking people out since Knois, and this is like an asylum for people who can't stop thinking about it. It's not for everyone, but it's harmless. Since the third stack anyway. So again, kind of talking about the highly etheric world, how we can all have the same idea, and it can also be in front of us out in the world, like the enactment of this idea. I think that's the concept. Something like that. I understood it the first time I read it, but the second time when I was like, or maybe even the third time when I was going through it, I was like, did I get this right? I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot that was over my head. You just kind of have to roll with that. When you're reading this, there's going to be stuff that's over your head, and you'll probably need to reread it 10,000 times to get the whole thing. Okay, this is going to be a long video. They've sacrificed something to make the content work better in the future. Maybe with the result that the next generation of hierarchs will be better than what we have now, and will leave the Adharians to work in peace. Unless Fra Halagastream said being hierarchs changes them. Yeah, so remember what I said about how they're not tracking politics, and there's not really that much room for a poli-sci major within the maths? This is where that changes a bit. There's definitely a power hierarchy happening. within the maths. There's definitely people who are extremely ambitious and they want to have sway over the ideas that are gaining traction. They want their ideas to be like dominating everybody else. And so positions are chosen with care. And the Adharians is one sort of chapter of thought that Erasmus would really like to be a part of, because his teacher, Orlo, is an Adharian. So, if you asked me what the Adharians believed, I would not be able to tell you. I am so sorry. It was one of those things that's over my head. But maybe it's in the glossary. No, it is. Yes, Edhar. A sant belonging, so Edhar was a person, a sant belonging to the Evanedrician order, who in 297 established a new order and later founded a consent, where he lived until he died. Both the order and the consent ended up being named after him. The full name of the latter is the Consent of Sant Edhar, but in common language this is often shortened to Sant Edhar or simply Edhar. That was not helpful at all. All right. Some of the definitions were like that. You'd have to look up one definition and then look up two more because there were two words in the definition you didn't understand. And it would send you on a rabbit trail. It's like an internet rabbit hole that you just it never ends. They've sacrificed, oh yeah, already did that. Okay, moving on. And that's the end of, let's see what part. That was the end of part 3. So now we're in part 4. Despite the best efforts of the sequencers who had brought these trees into beings, only 1 leaf in 10 was high-grade page material, suitable for a typical quarto-sized book. The most common flaw was smallness or irregularity, such that when placed in the cutting frame, it would not make a rectangle. This was the case for about 4 out of 10 leaves, more during cold or dry years, fewer if the growing season had been favorable. Holes gnawed by insects or thick veins that made it difficult to write on the underside might render a leaf unusable, save as compost. These flaws were especially common in leaves that grew near the ground. The best yield was to be found in the middle branches, not too far out from the trunk. The arbortex have given them stout boughs in the middle section, easier for the young ones to clamber on. Every autumn when I'd been a fid, which is like a kid in the math, I'd spent a week up on those branches, picking the best leaves and skimming them down to an older avout who stacked them in baskets. Later in the day, we'd tie them by their stems to lines stretching from tree to tree and let them dry as the weather turned colder. After the first killing frost, we would bring them indoors, stack them, and pile on tons of flat rocks. It took about a century for them to age properly. So I loved this description. It's one of those things that's like a really... The mathic lifestyle is one of the things that this author decided to focus on. Like, that was one of his 3 big topics, was the lifestyle of people who lived in the maths. And this was one of those details that I think all of us loved because we're readers. Basically, it's these plants that they grow that give forth leaves that they then turn into pages on which to write their books. And it takes a century for them to dry, which means people 100 years ago did the same thing that they do every year. And then they go back and they find the century-old ones and start writing on them. So you just basically have to trust that people in the past did their job and that there's going to be enough pages for you to write on. Because these maths are self-propagating. They take care of themselves. They don't need any help from the outside world, basically, other than they need kids who are going to join their ranks. That's what they need from the outside world. So, like, everybody loved that because we're all book lovers. Okay. Fascinating to hear new pages of books are it's fascinating to hear how pages of books are harvested and prepared. Okay. So, I forgot. There are certain things that I was supposed to look up. And I just remembered now that I was supposed to do that, and I totally didn't. Oops. One of those things was, what the heck is voco? Oh, well. I mean, we could look it up in the glossary together. It's probably not going to be that helpful, though. Voco. A rarely celebrated ought by which the secular power evokes, calls forth from the math, and about whose talents are needed in the secular world, except in very unusual cases, the one evoked never returns to the mathic world. Okay, that is important later. Because if the outside world is aware of the ideas of a theor, and they pull him out of the math to help with something, that basically means the rest of the people that he's lived his entire life with are never going to see him again, because they're going to still be in the maths. And he's going to be out in the secular world, unless they can meet on an appart. But some of the apparts are only 100 or 1,000 years. So you're realistically never going to see that guy again. So that is important, though. Okay. He shrugged. Your point is well reasoned, but don't be too dismissive of the poles. Many things converge there. They're talking about lines of latitude and longitude, poles of the earth, North and South Pole. Like what? Oh, many things converge there. Like what? Lines of longitude? I scoffed. Archibald, in a similar spirit. Migratory birds? Jessry. Compass needles? It's just the kind of nerdy humor that I loved. And I marked a lot of their jokes like that. It's just cute. Like what? Compass needles? And then in a higher pitched voice, broke in, polar orbits. My note was just, this is hilarious. So they're trying to figure out why there are cameras that they are not allowed to look at pointed towards the poles of their planet. Why aren't they allowed to look, and why are these cameras pointed at the poles? And so they're like, in their heads, what could they be looking at? What happens at the poles? So that was all their guesses. Lines of longitude, migratory birds, compass needles, polar orbits. That fourth one is actually important. Okay, moving on. Okay, so it talks about Sline subculture. Sline is like people who live extramuros, or people who live outside of the maths. So there's terms that are used. Slines versus burgers, and I don't know what the difference between slines versus burgers are. Shall we check the glossary? What I was gonna do was check out the ebook and look those things up, and I totally forgot to do that. Yeah, there's nothing about burgers in the glossary. That's unfortunate. Hopefully it's not too important of a distinction, but maybe it's something I'll understand in the future. That was one of the things I was supposed to look up. Okay. Look for things that have beauty. It tells you that a ray is shining in from, well, a true place, the Highland Theoric world. So I marked that, I think, because that might be like the first time they actually use that world, that name for it, maybe. Again, her face was hard to read. She wanted to know whether I believed in all that stuff, and I wanted to know if she did. I reckoned the stakes were higher for her. As an Adharian, I could get away with it. Yeah, I don't know if he would have called it by that name, but that's what he was driving at. So I think they're talking about Orlo here. Orlo has been forced to leave the math at this point, I believe. That's something that happens in the plot. And it's a huge shakeup in particularly Erasmus's world, because I feel like Orlo and Erasmus are probably the people that you know best in this book. But also Erasmus has a sister that we get to meet through Appert. And she's pretty distinctive as the only female character, I think, in the whole book that's like named. There's one or two females among this like ninja class as well. There's this ninja class of Mathic dwellers, Fras and Sewers. And there's like a couple females among them, which is kind of funny. That would be like the one order that would be like, I'm not sure if there would be a female ninja class. But other than that, no, there's other girls. I'm trying to think. It's just the other girls don't play huge roles, and I feel like we see his sister probably the most out of all the characters. There's other girls that, like there's a girl that Erasmus dates, and then there's a girl that he has a crush on before he starts dating, and I can't even remember their names, honestly. But here he's talking to one of them, Tulia. This is, I think, the one that he has a crush on, but not the one that he dates. And so she is trying to ask Erasmus whether he believes in the Hylian theoric world, which is, they think, why Erasmus was like thrown out of the math. It was not like he was called by Voco out of the math. He was like anathematized. He was kicked out, with like no belongings or anything. So, yeah. Okay, moving on. Fra Paflagon, the hundreder who was evoked. Voco evoked. Okay, I get it now. Evoked is the term that is used when somebody is in Voco, meaning they've been called out of the math by the secular world in order to explain some element that they have studied, that the secular world, extramuros, knows that they have studied. And so there was a hundreder, Paflagon, who was evoked. And it's like this whole stir up happening in the maths because all these people are suddenly leaving. And that's not like a common thing for people to leave. But suddenly there's like, 2, 3, 4, 5 people being called out or being ejected. And leaving the mass. And it's just a huge shakeup, and it leaves the people left behind with a lot of emotions of like loss and stuff. So really, really fascinating. That's when things get really good. I'm like, oh my gosh, things are changing. What is happening? You just have this big question mark in your mind. What is happening? Okay. So the thing about the hundreder who is evoked, Fra Paflagon, he was Orlo's mentor. So the Steelyard says that his evocation and the trouble Orlo got into must be connected. So it's coming together. People are leaving the maths, and like it's the same reason that they're all leaving. But the people left behind in the maths, since they're not allowed to know what's going on unless they're Ida, they're like, why? What is the thing? So Orlo, by this point, when he was kicked out, it was because he was seeking information outside of the math. He was trying to figure out what was going on extramuros, and you're not supposed to do that. So he broke the rules, and that's why he was thrown out. But then other people start being evoked, and they're like, it's all for the same reason. So basically, Fra Erasmus and his friends are on a mission to figure out what Orlo figured out. And Orlo has left them some clues. So they're like on a sort of scavenger hunt, so to speak, trying to figure out why everybody's leaving. What is going on out there? And it's so interesting and fun. I'm just getting excited remembering all of the emotions I had going through this. Okay. You know about atom smashers? Particle accelerators? Sure, Praxic Age installations. Huge and expensive. Okay, my comment on here was, I lost interest. This is way over my head. TMI. There are moments in this book where it's like, okay, that's TMI on the physics, dude. Nobody knows what you're talking about. So I skipped like a lot. There was like a huge skip here between flags. So at this point, I was a little bored. And there was some boredom in there. This was probably the hardest part for me to go on. And then there's another part where they're driving for like endless days. And that also was hard. Hard to stay interested. I woke to the sound of bells. I couldn't make sense of them. Then I remembered where I was and understood that they were not our bells, but those of the monks, rousing them for a punishingly early ritual. So, why did I mark this? I cannot keep track of who is who. There's too much for a first read, maybe on reread. At this point, Erasmus has also been... Is it evoked or did he just leave? How exactly did he leave? I don't remember. Maybe I listened to that portion. Maybe that's why there was no notes on it. But he ends up leaving. So I need to reread that because I didn't really realize that there was such a huge skip in time there. But anyways, he has left the math and now he's experiencing monastery bells. And I have no idea who anybody is. That probably didn't help listening to that portion on audiobook. Skipping another bunch of pages. We were in the habit of referring to the secular power as if it were one thing down through the ages. This seemed simple-minded or even insulting to some extras, though they did essentially the same thing when they spoke of the powers that be. Of course, we knew it was an oversimplification, but for us, it was a useful convenience. Whatever empire, republic, despotate, papacy, anarchy, or depopulated wasteland that lay beyond our walls at a given moment, we could slap this name on it and predict certain things of it. So basically, yeah, the secular power is their name for whatever's happening outside of their maths that they do not care about. Is a constant and a math the same thing? Let me see. Consent. A relatively large community of avowed in which two or more maths exist side by side. In general, centenarian and millenarian orders are only to be found in consents, as practical considerations make it difficult for them to exist as freestanding maths. Interesting. So centenarian is the 100-year one where they only have appart every 100 years. They only connect with the outside world every 100 years. And the millenarians, it's every millennia they connect with the outside world. So every 1,000 years. So yeah, consents are like combinations of one or more maths. Two or more maths, I guess. Okay. You figured out that the earth was old, didn't you? Yes, he said immediately. I spent years on rafts going down those rivers. Years. The whole way, there's rocks strewn along the banks. Rocks the size of houses that fell off the canyon walls higher up. Just looking down one of these canyons, you can see it happens all the time. You mean rocks falling down? Yeah, it's like if you're... Yeah. I loved the way the audio narrator, he would say, yeah. The way he said it was always really cute. I really enjoyed the audio narrator of these books. Yeah, the way he said it. Anyway, yeah, it's like if you're driving down this highway and you see skid marks on the pavement, like those right there, and any idiot knows that skidding happens. If you see lots of skid marks, well, that means skidding is common. If you see lots of fallen rocks in a canyon, then rock falls are pretty common. So I kept expecting to see one. Every day I'd be drifting down the river on that raft with the clients, and they'd be sleeping or talking about whatever they wanted to talk about. They'd be sleeping or talking about whatever they wanted to talk about, and I'd keep an eye on the canyon walls, waiting to see a rock fall. But you never did. Never. Not once. So you realized that the time scale had to be enormous. Yeah. Anyways, I liked this description because it's part of why I think there's like this divide between young Earth and old Earth, because it's like really obvious that the Earth is really old. But young Earth advocates, I think probably... somebody put it this way once to me, was God can create things with age. So he's like, that to me seemed like a little bit of a cop-out. To me, it seems like pretty obvious that the earth is old. But that doesn't affect whether I believe in God or not. I absolutely still believe in God. So yeah, I feel like it's a bit of a false divide. I hope it wasn't too disruptive, but I did have to go for a walk because we're another camera battery down and my camera also ran out of room. So I deleted my old files and kept on going. So we're going to keep on going. I don't know if I'll be able to finish today, but I'm going to do my best. So let's keep going. I really like that description of why he realized there was a problem with his faith specifically. He's like, there was this person who was talking, realized, oh, I believed in something that's obviously not true. And I think that's really important. That's something actually the Catholic Church is really keen on, is a truth can't cancel out a truth, you know? The fact that God exists, it doesn't mean that other scientific truths can't be true at the same time. So if there's a conflict, that means obviously you're wrong about something, and it's not the fact that God exists. You might just have your science mixed up. I think that's where Christians go wrong sometimes, is when they try to be like, I guess, experts in fields where they aren't experts, and they try to say how things happened when they actually don't know. And I feel like geology, biology, those kinds of things, there are Christians who are experts on those things, but not all Christians are. So we got to leave some room for the people who know what they're talking about. Because if we don't, they're not going to become Christians. Like, it's going to affect their ability to have faith if we act like we know something that we don't. So I find that really important. That's like a journey I've been on since I was a Ute. Okay, moving on. Thousands of years ago, the work that people did had been broken down into jobs that were the same every day, in organizations where people were interchangeable parts. All of the story had bled out of their lives. That was how it had to be. It was how you got a productive economy. But it would be easy to see a will at work behind this. Not exactly an evil will, but a selfish will. The people who'd made the system thus were jealous, not of money and not of power, but of story. If their employees came home at day's end with interesting stories to tell, it meant that something had gone wrong. A blackout, a strike, a spree killing. The powers that be would not suffer others to be in stories of their own unless they were fake stories that had been made up to motivate them. People who couldn't live without story had been driven into conscience or into jobs like Yule's. All others had to look somewhere outside of work for a feeling that they were part of a story, which I guessed was why seculars were so concerned with sports and with religion. How else could you see yourself as part of an adventure? Something with a beginning, middle, and an end in which you played a significant part. We have had it ready-made because we were part of the project of learning new things. Even if it didn't always move fast enough for people like Jeffrey, it did move. You could tell where you were and what you were doing in that story. Yule got all of this for free by living his stories from day to day, and the only drawback was that the world held his story to be of small account. I feel like that's what like indie authors or small authors have to live with. It's like they want to tell their story and it's vitally interesting to them, but it can be hard to like find other people who find it that interesting. I just realized my lights aren't on, sorry. Oh well. So this explanation was like, I wrote an interesting take in some things in economies, careers, an interesting take on careers and economies. Aren't there people who love any kind of work, or who love their work, even if it's not a story? And I feel like there are people who just love working, or they really love their job, even though they're not like part of a story, so to speak. I don't know that story has a lot to do with it, honestly. But I think it is true as well that a lot of people are in like soul killing jobs where they would just love to be doing something else that felt meaningful for them. But he also makes a good point that we do find our meaning outside of work. Many of us, work isn't our meaningful thing in our life. Our family is, and our faith is, and stuff like that. So it was an interesting take, and I just thought it was really beautifully worded. Letting the argument play out would have been a waste of breath. We, the Theors, who had retreated, or, depending on how you liked your history, been herded into the maths at the reconstitution, had the power to change the physical world through praxis. Up to a point, ordinary people liked the changes we made, but the more clever the praxis became, the less people understood it, and the more dependent they became on us, and they didn't like that at all. So there we have it. That's the reason why that's part of the reason why Theors were herded into maths. Praxic is like technology. So, basically they were like, go in there where you can't bother us, basically, except for at Appert, and we'll happily listen to you for a couple days, and we'll draw what we like from it. So the reconstitution, that is when, after the third sack, which was a sack of monasteries, that is when I guess the math system was really like made the way it is today. Like, it's what locked them up, basically, is what it seems like to me. Let me see if I can, let's see what the glossary has to say. The reconstitution, the state of affairs that came into being following the terrible events, whereby almost all learned and literate persons were concentrated together in maths and conscience. So that's what I said, basically. So yes, I was correct. So the terrible events don't really get explained. There's a theory about 3 of the terrible events. There's 3, but they just don't know, like they've lost the information. So we'll get into that later on. The concern for people who live extramuros is that because the Theors know so much more about praxis and technology and science, and they spend their life doing that they will become a dictatorship because they know everything, and people who aren't in those fields don't know anything about how it works. Erasmus is like, I don't know if you know anybody from, I don't know how you could think that if you know the people that I know who are in the maths. He's like, that's not a threat from us. Like, we're not going to try and become dictators. But even as he says that, there are characters in the maths where you're like, okay, I could see that guy becoming a dictator. And there are other reasons that we get into why that happened, why there was a reconstitution. It wasn't just the terrible events. Well, it's really one of the terrible events specifically. I think it's one of the terrible events. We'll get there. I just didn't see it because I had this idea that you were going out with Rosk. And this is where Erasmus is talking with his sister, whose name is Cord, strangely. She's going through guys a bit quickly, and he's like, I thought you were going out with this other guy. And I was like, I don't even remember Rosk. I don't know. I must have missed that. I think this is where they're driving. Yeah. There's a lot of driving happening here. And I didn't pay super close attention during the driving periods. It's just kind of boring. The driving periods were a bit boring. That's funny, because if anyone actually did prove the existence of God, we'd just say, nice proof, Frobly, and start believing in God. Yep, that's like the exact problem. There is an element of faith in believing in God. Like, people of faith have their reasons, and they've seen things that are beyond reason a lot of times, and that's why they do believe what they believe. But there is still an element of faith. I feel like my hair is like really not curly anymore. Oh well, it is what it is. Yeah, no, we've lost the curls. It's okay. But at the same time, there are like scientists who have reasons for why they believe what they believe. Like, and some of it is not like entirely beyond evidence. There's this really famous psychiatrist who wrote books. He was an atheist until he met some people who were truly evil. And he's like, okay, if evil exists, then the opposite probably exists. And so he started believing in God. There's that. There's like physicists who believe in God, and they've seen things like mathematically and scientifically, or physicists in particular, it seems like are more, maybe because they're more metaphysical, they have an easier time, it seems like, believing in God than people in different areas of science that are maybe less theoretical. But anyway, it's an interesting conversation. And I wish that the book had spent more energy on these discussions. But I feel like, honestly, that's like probably my main complaint. Like I said, there's a couple boring sections, but I don't really complain about those. Honestly, they're partly probably because I was listening to those sections that I found them boring. But I wish that it had spent more energy on the question of God, but I just don't think that that's what Neal Stephenson cares about. Like, it comes into it, but he clearly doesn't believe in God. So that just wasn't his subject. But like, if I was writing this book, we definitely would have talked about that more. It would have been something that we asked people about down the line. I don't want to, it's not really spoilery. Like, this whole video is spoilery. So at this point, you've been spoiled about a lot of things. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Okay. To us, you're like people who've put out your own eyes and are now trying to explore a new continent. You're grievously handicapped, but for that reason, you may have developed senses and faculties we lack. So I was like, yeah, exactly. That's how I feel about it. When you have like faith and science conflicting, like supposedly, when you look at it, that's how this religious person explains it. But the scientific guy was like, I'm just going to hold my tongue and not even get into all that is wrong with what you've just said. The gist of it seems to be that we aren't evil or misguided. You just think that in the end we'll agree with the book. So these religious people obviously have their own book. We don't know what's in the book. That's not covered. That would be another thing that I would be interested in. But I think he just dismisses it because he's not interested in what's in the book, or similarities to the Bible. Like, I'm interested in what's in this book. Is it similar to what's in the Bible? Does it talk about Jesus Christ? What is in this book? But we don't cover that. That's not what this author's interested in. And that's fine. But I don't really see what else so wrong with that. It is true that scientists know more about the physical world than like people of faith in general. Like I said, there are scientists who are people of faith. But I would say that the majority of people of faith are not scientists. So of course they're going to know more about the physical sciences. Of course they will. I mean, that seemed like perfectly reasonable to me. So I don't understand why Erasmus is like, no, there's a lot wrong with that. Okay. I don't know why I had a flag there, but we're going into part 8 now. But they'd not made me swear a vow, and I got the sense that I could walk out the door whenever I chose. They just pretended it was a math when they were dealing with anyone who might not understand. Being in a vow was their cover story. So this is Orthina, which is my favorite part of the book, is at Orthina. I'm probably not alone in that. So basically, what's been happening with the plot is Erasmus, after leaving the math with some of his friends, they have been on a journey, and his sister, they've been on a journey to try and find Orlo, because clearly Orlo knew what was going on. They're also with another Fra called Fra Jad, who also clearly knows what's going on. And Jad is the one who sent Erasmus in this direction to Orthina to find Orlo. And what's been happening at Orthina is they've been digging there. There's been some kind of archaeological dig. I can't remember everything now because of what happens later, which is really dramatic. So anyway, when he arrives at Orthina, he realizes, oh, this math that Orlo has entered is not really a math. It's just called a math, but it's really not. That's just what they're doing to keep people out who might not understand what we're doing here. So I was really excited when I marked that up, because I just thought, oh, that's so exciting. What's going on? So exciting. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep my foot alive here. My foot is like dying. Okay. What is this, Orlo? If a geometer landed here and engaged you in conversation, how would you characterize Orlo to it? As the man, the very complicated, bipedal, and slightly hot, animated entity standing right over there. But depending on how a geometer sees things, it might respond, I see nothing there but a vacuum with a sparse dusting of probability waves. So this was so interesting. I guess I didn't mark. There's like another conversation earlier in the book, where two of the about are talking. I don't remember which ones, but it's about how a spider and a fly or something could talk to each other, even though they have like completely different types of senses. Like, how would you describe, a sense to another being that doesn't have that sense or something like that? Basically, they're trying to describe the world to each other when they are sort of incapable of what you would think of as normal communication. How would they learn how to communicate? That's what they're talking here, because, spoiler, this book is a first contact novel. That's what I've been waiting to say for the entire 45 minutes that I've been filming this video. Or has it been? No, it's been an hour and 15 minutes that I've been filming this video. This is a first contact story, and the geometers are the umbrella term for the aliens that they have met now at Orthina. So they now know that there are aliens over their planet, and there's a spaceship, and that's why everybody was called out of the maths. That's why they have left the maths, and they're trying to figure out what to do with these aliens. Are they like going to hurt this planet? Why haven't they done anything? And the secret lies at Orthina. But this particular conversation, it mirrors an earlier one in the book. And they're talking about, how do we communicate with these geometers? That's what they're calling the aliens, because they're communicating by means of geometry, because geometry is what the Hylian theoric world is made up of. Perfect math. They're using geometry as the only means possible for them to communicate with each other, because they don't know anything about these geometers other than on their ship there's a geometric proof. I think that might be the right term. Some kind of math, a symbol of math, of mathematics is on their ship. And so these people on Arb is the planet that this book is set on. The Arborans, whatever they're called, the people who live on Arb, they know that the geometers understand geometry. So that's why they're called geometers. And that's how they're trying to communicate with them. Or at least Orlo is, as we find out later. Spoiler alert again. One must be able to take in givens. One must be able to take in givens from sparse dustings of probability waves in a vacuum, i.e. see stuff. Another humor moment that I loved. But we'll just keep going. If you don't get it, I'm not going to try and explain. But I think that this author does that frequently to help us try to understand. I don't know how successful it is, but he's using all these scientific terms that like most of us do not understand. And he's like, oh yeah, and in parentheses, this is what you really mean. He has, usually our main character, Erasmus, is the one who explains things, because Erasmus, he's a bright kid, but he's like probably closer to the average intellect than some of his peers, like Jessry, who's like astronomically smart. So it's often our POV character, Erasmus, who is explaining things to us. Thank you, Erasmus. I just realized that most of this video I was not looking at you guys in the camera. I'm out of the habit of filming. Sorry about that. I need to remember. Look at the camera. Look in your eyes. Swallow the camera, as they say in K-pop. Okay. I think that the stenciled messages are opening instructions, she says. It is the same message, the same stencil, repeated in 4 places around the door. In each case, there's a line painted from it. An arrow? Someone called. Those are arrows! They don't look like our arrows, Cord said. But maybe the geometers do them differently. Each of them is aimed at a panel about the size of my hand. These panels appear to be held in place with fasteners. Flush head machine bolts, 4 per panel. I don't have the right tool to put into them, but I can fake it with a daisy head driver. So this is where it's nice to have Cord along for the ride, Cord the mechanic. Kind of funny that one of the only female characters would be a mechanic. But, I mean, they have to be useful to the story to be in this story. There's no baggage on this story. You have to be useful. So they have a spaceship. There's been a spaceship that came down to Orthena with a geometer on it who is dead. And they're trying to figure out what happened because she's been shot in the back. And so thankfully Cord is there to help them figure out this spaceship and how it works, how to open it and such. All right. There is insurrection, perhaps civil war in the icosahedron. A faction that wishes to share information with us, and another that will kill to prevent it. So obviously they're drawing this conclusion. The icosahedron is the geometer's ship that is currently in orbit around Arb. Obviously there's an insurrection because the alien who came down to Orthena was shot in the back. So they're trying to figure out what to do about that. LOL the sword. Okay, I don't think my note had anything to do with that. I think that was, yeah. Okay, and then the action we've all been waiting for. This is like the only action so far in the book, and we're on page 593. It might not be the only action, but no, there's been like a little bit of other action, I guess. There's not a lot of action in this book. It's mostly like interesting conversations. So, after that, I could not hear anything for half an hour. Hearing was worse than useless. I was sorry I'd been born with ears. Basically, the geometers throw a giant rock at Orthena, which is a volcano, and they make the volcano explode. And it ends up killing Orlo. But they do manage to save the body of the geometer, who came down to try and talk to them, thanks to Orlo. Orlo saves the body. He like throws it up into a ship, and there's not enough room for Orlo to jump in as well and for them to still get away. And so, my comment on here was, hold on to your butts, because this is like the most exciting action of the book. This is why it's my favorite period of the book, even though it's really sad that Orlo dies. And it happened all the time that the compromise between 2 perfectly rational alternatives was something that made no sense at all. I thought, that is so accurate and true. The compromise between 2 rational positions was often something that made no sense at all. So now, basically, there's going to be a convox, I think is what they call it, where a bunch of Theors, a bunch of avouts get together and discuss what's happening and try to figure out what to do about the problem of the geometers. What was the point of my having a truer explanation of these things if it could only be understood by a Vout who devoted their whole lives to theorics? Cord, independent soul that she was, wouldn't want to live her life under the sway of such ideas any more than she'd want to cook breakfast with a machine that she couldn't understand and fix. I feel like this is how a lot of like older generation really views technology. They're like, I don't really want to live in this like really technologically developed age that I can't understand. It's kind of exhausting to try and keep up with. So I'd rather just go back to a simpler time, or like live like I live in a simpler time without the use of technology. And so that's kind of Erasmus coming to that conclusion. It's like, well, for most people, this explanation that I'm giving, even though my explanation is really correct, they have other ways of explaining it that might be less correct, but does that matter to them? No, because they don't need the most correct explanation to go about living their lives, because that the theorics do not dominate their life like it does mine, basically. And Cord is among those. So he feels like he's like lost Cord a little bit to religion in this case. I think is what draws Cord away from Erasmus's very rational belief. It is all new matter. Everything that came down in that probe, all the hardware, all the flesh, is what we would call new matter, in the sense that nuclei are put together in a way that is not natural. Not in this cosmos, anyway. This was so interesting because they're talking about, so new matter is kind of like plastic to us. Plastic is new matter because it's not found in nature. We made it. And so they call that new matter. So what they're saying is everything that came down in the spaceship with the dead geometer is new matter. The whole spaceship, the woman, it's all new matter because it was not created in this cosmos. It wasn't created by the same mechanism that ours were created on Arb. That there, everything was made in Arb. So they're coming to terms with that, and that was like such a cool way to explain it. It's one of those moments where it's like light bulb comes on. I'm enjoying it so much. It was one of those great moments that I was really enjoying. I just realized too, I'm still in my walking class. I just basically came in here after my walk. Oh well, it's fine. I've been on here for half an hour. I'm not going to change it now. Okay. Sant Orlo! And I put exclamation mark, these 2 pages! There was so much explanation here of what happened that it was really exciting. Basically, what's happening is Erasmus is in isolation because he's been exposed to the geometer, and they don't know if that has exposed them to like weird illnesses, weird bacteria, etc. So he's in isolation, but people can still communicate with him. They have to he's locked inside. They have to communicate with him through the outside. So Jessery is talking with him, and Jessery is taking this opportunity to talk with him because he is now dating Erasmus's girl. Or they were. Okay, moving on. Here it's all about messels. The maximum head count is 7. That's considered to be the largest number you can fit around a table such that everyone can hear. And people aren't always splitting off into side conversations. So there's a dining hall somewhere with a lot of 7-person tables in it? No, that'd be too noisy. Each messel is held in a small private room called a messalin. So this, again, I just feel like there was so much thought put into how the experience of the Avowed would go. And if there was like this world, potentially threatening thing like aliens coming into the story, how they would handle it, how they would go about it so rationally, all the steps that they would come up with, because they're very bright people and they think very rationally and logically. And I thought it was really well put together, and that was one of those details that I really liked, that everybody would be in 7-person table. The Odd of Anathem has not been celebrated at Tredegarth for close to 1,000 years. How can that be? This place must have 20 times the population of Edhar. All the different chapters and endowments make it possible for weirdos and misfits to find homes. You and I grew up in a tough town, brother, Leo said. So, yeah, basically, because they are now part of a convox, they're actually staying in a different math, like a giant one, where these few selected Theors are called together to solve the problem of the geometers. And they're realizing that in their neck of the woods, where it's more rural, all the weirdos would get thrown out, anathematized. But here, there's room for the weirdos. They can all find their niche. Just like in any city, people who are more unusual in their tastes or interests find, what does Anne of Green Gables call them? Kindred spirits. The last group were the Matterites, one of the very few Mathic orders that believed in God. I really enjoy the Matterites because of what happens with them. later. So I paid more attention the second time around, because at first when I saw this, I was like, of course the faith believers are rude, whiny, and antisocial. That was my first comment. But I actually was like really interested by the Matterites later because of who is hiding among them. Okay. Orlo and I went up to the mountain to talk. I said, we became quite involved in our dialogue and didn't notice it was getting dark. Why did I put something about... Okay. Yeah, I don't know why I put a comment here about enchanters, but yeah, I'm confused about enchanters. But now we have met one of the more fun dynamic characters of the book. What is his name though? I can't remember. Lodegear, Frau Lodegear. He's so obnoxious, but honestly so fun too at the same time. He's one of the more political members, and he loves to stir the pot and make others look bad. It's not like I like the guy, but he does make things funny and dynamic because he argues. And a lot of the other abouts don't really argue with each other because they don't want to be seen as like emotional, but he employs every trick in the book because he's a rhetor. So he knows how to use all of the fallacies to make people believe what he's saying over what everybody else believes, even if everybody else is right. But in fact, he is actually right about Orlo. Okay. I believe that Orlo was of the view that we might be able to settle some of those ancient questions now that we have access to conscious beings from other star systems. Thank you. I want to know this, too. That was my comment. Of course, they didn't ask the aliens what I would have asked them. This is what I've been working my way up to telling you guys. I would have loved for them to ask the aliens their experiences with God. That never comes up. They never talk about it. I'm like, it's not like one of the main questions about existence. Not to this guy. Not to Neal Stephenson, and not to apparently anybody in the Mathic orders. That question is already settled for them. They're not curious if these geometers have any experience of a spiritual nature. Yeah. I believe Orlo was of the... Yeah. So they're coming up with what they want to talk to the geometers about as well during this convox. How is yanking my rope going to help? Oh, it's an old tradition here, Archibald said. I've been reading up on it. If the dialogue gets boring, the servitors show their disdain by voting with their feet, withdrawing to the kitchens. The Doins are supposed to notice this. Again, the world building of the Avouts is so well developed. There's all these traditions that make complete sense, and they have all this humor because they're all really smart. It's really fun. It might sound dry and dusty to somebody who doesn't think it's as funny as I do, but I found it delightful. Totally delightful. So, I believe, Frau Pflegon, I believe you are citing this as evidence that the geometers all came from different cosmi, or, to use Frau Jad's term, different narratives. A somewhat more conventional term would be world tracks, Sir Moira put in. Hey, it's another girl. There actually is one. Use of narrative is somewhat well loaded. These terms will come up frequently in the end of the book, and things get crazy. It is rare, Moira said, and it is associated in some people's mind with the lineage. So my comment on this was I barely remember anything about this lineage thing, and I feel like there is maybe something in here later that talks about it very briefly, but the lineage isn't like super well explained. That's okay. It's fine. Moving on. Earth. Okay. The 4 types of geometers. It comes out that there's 4 types of aliens. One of them is called Antarcts, and it says Antarct's most unusual feature is a big ice continent at the South Pole. Then, perhaps anticipating another correction from Barb, or whichever pole is situated at the bottom of the picture. And so my thought was, is this Earth? Because Antarctica sounds like Earth, and we have a South Pole. And we know at this point that one of the geometers has been among them. He's been hiding among the Matterites, and his name is Jules Verne. So we know that he's from Earth. So finally Earth actually comes into it, which is fun. Yep, his wife was from Antarctica. Yep, so the Antarctic, yes. Javarn is the one who comes up with these names and tells them. Antarcts, Pangaeas, Diasps, and Quators. So I was like, well, I mean, Pangaea, isn't that what, I think that's what the continents of Earth were called before they all became separate. And then Quators could be like equator. So I was like, well, maybe there's, like, maybe, I don't know, which one is Earth? I don't know. But I did discover later it was Antarctica. The Everything Killer. Okay, finally, these, like, descriptions were really helpful, especially before we realized that there was a glossary at the back. So the Everything Killers is a weapon system of unusual praxic sophistication, thought to have been used to devastating effect in the terrible events. The belief is widely held but unproved that the complicity of the Theors in the development of this praxis led to universal agreement that they should henceforth be segregated from non-theorical society, a policy that, when effected, became synonymous with the reconstitution. So thank you for explaining that. It's actually the fact that Theors in the past came up with, like, essentially nuclear bombs. This is kind of the idea I'm getting from the Everything Killer. That's why they were herded into the mass. That's why people didn't trust them and didn't want them to become a dictatorship, because they came up with the Everything Killers. Thank you for that information. How might the knowledge propagate from a common theoric world? I won't call it Hylaean, since presumably there was no person named Hylea on Quator, to the minds of different Saunts in different worlds. And is it still going on at this moment between us and them? Moira had been edging back towards the door as she tossed these mind bombs into the kitchen, and now almost collided with Emin Beldo, fresh in from escorting his Doin home. Well, it sounds like the Messel will discuss that tomorrow. So, Emin said, after we'd set out on the right track, the bottom line is that in any one particular on any one particular world track, things make sense. The laws of nature are followed. Yes, I said, that's what a world track is, a sequence of hemspace points strung together just so, to make it look like the laws of nature are preserved. This was definitely over my head. But basically it's saying that within one world track, the laws of physics will be maintained and consistent. But outside of that world track, they might change. I think that's what it's saying. But I said, I'm still totally lost on hemspace. Maybe I can do a little research. Yeah, that didn't happen. So Earth equivalents are configuration, state, and phase space. So if anybody can understand that, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Let me know. I gave a little snort of laughter, simply out of habit. The Everything Killers were only ever mentioned in the same way as one might talk of God or hell, but everything about Leo's tone and manner told me that he was being altogether literal. There was a long silence while I tried to absorb this news. We're all pretty sure that what we are looking at are the original plans for the Everything Killers. So basically, Leo drops the bomb that some people in the Convox who are leading it, are actually having everybody look at different parts of the original plans for building Everything Killers. And that's like, what? We're doing it again? Basically, Theors are building Everything Killers again. This is why we've been locked into Convoxes for like millennia. What? If they're willing to do that, then nothing is real anymore. So yeah, if Theors are willing to deploy Everything Killers, then they are locked away for good reason, was my comment. However, Basically, Ayla, which is the girl that Erasmus is dating, is organizing, what do they call it? A network of cells. They call them leucobes, which is basically a group of people discussing things together, like in this case, secretly. Basically, yeah. Ayla is organizing a resistance to the people who are having everybody look at how to build an everything killer. And the reason why it took them a while to figure out that they were working on everything killers is because everybody at the Convox was working on separate parts of it. And so you would have to put it all together to realize, oh, our separate jobs all together would make an everything killer. That's what's actually being built here, with the idea that they can retaliate against the geometers for what happened at Orithena, because people did die at Orithena. Okay, moving on. We've seen appeals to mob sentiment. No one believes in the Hylian theoric world anymore. Everyone thinks protism is crazy. We've seen appeals to authority, refuted in the 29th century by no less than so-and-so. Efforts to play on our personal insecurity. How can any sane person of sound mind take this seriously? And many other techniques that I have forgotten the names of, as it has been so long since I studied the Sphinx. So, I must begin by applauding the rhetorical mastery that has given the rest of us an opportunity to enjoy this excellent meal and rest our voices. But I would be remiss if I did not point out that Frau Lodegier has yet to offer up a single argument worthy of the name against the proposition that there is a Hylian theoric world, that it is populated by mathematical entities, Knoans as we call them, that are non-spatial and non-temporal in nature, and that our minds have some capability of accessing them. Nor could I ever, exclaimed Frau Lodegier, whose jaw had been working at an astounding pace during the last few moments to get a bite of food squared away. You protists are ever so careful to frame the discussion so that it can't be touched by rational debate. I can't prove you're wrong any more than I can prove the non-existence of God. These are the kind of arguments, and I'm living for them. They're so fun. Basically, Frau Lodegier has been trying to discredit the Hylian theoric world with all of his rhetorical tricks, and of which he has many, and they are misleading, purposefully. He just wants to be wrong. He wants to be acknowledged as correct at any cost, including being incorrect. He doesn't care if he's incorrect. I should look up I should look up rhetorical tricks is my note on this. I did study some fallacies in my teenage years as part of actually math, which was interesting, like a algebra textbook. Do you mean to suggest, Lodegier asked, as though not quite believing his ears, that Arv might be the Hylian theoric world of some other world that has people living on it? Yes, in fact, that is what they are suggesting. Oh, the Hylian theoric world, it just gets more and more interesting with every passing page during this convox. It's beautiful. I love it. Basically, what we learn is that these aliens have been traveling in search of their own Hylian theoric world. They've been doing space travel in order to find it because they got a vision through the Hylian theoric world of what was happening during the third sack on Arb. So, that's what we learned, yeah. That basically they have a vision of the third sack and they interpreted it a certain way. But really what this author is arguing for is the existence of a Hylian theoric world. And so I think the argument of the book is that, of course, the Hylian theoric world exists. And probably in our future, we will meet aliens who have a lot of the same concepts that we do because they have access to the cloud, if you will. The Hylian theoric world is like the cloud. All of the ideas are floating up there. They're all accessible no matter where you live in the cosmos or whatever cosmos you're living in. But yeah, basically every time these original aliens who built the first spacecraft arrive at another world that's populated by sentient beings, they discover more about truth. they discover, oh, this is a better world than ours. This is a more rational. I think the idea is that rationalism and technology can eventually make us all better to the point where we essentially get to like an earthly sort of heaven. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this discussion. That really the source of any heaven that humans can have in a true sense will be found through rationality and technology. So I guess that is a moral argument. I'm sort of putting this together on the fly, which is why it's fun to do these videos, because sometimes it's like, light bulb, I'm figuring this out as we go. So yeah, it's a rational argument for morality. An argument for a rational basis of morality, which I disagree with. I do think that morality is somewhat rational, because I think God created our minds. He gave us those minds. And so it's not like it's anti-intelligence or anti-intelligent. It's like, it's not that it's anti-rational. It's just that our laws came from God. So all we can really do is discover them. But the source is God. It's not from our minds. Our minds do not make things more, our minds do not make things better in that sense of like creating morality. I think the biggest movers and shakers who create a better humankind are Christians. That would be my argument. Hang on, I gotta change my camera again. Another battery down. According to the iconography of the time, we as Deolators had nothing to do with redders or enchanters, and so were considered innocent of what we were guilty of, said Asquin, who seemed to have chosen this moment to stop being nice. Anyway, Javarn said, we evacuated to an island deep in the southern polar regions and lived off the available plants, birds, and insects. This is where we developed our cuisine, which I know many of you find distasteful. We remember the third sack with every bite of food we take. I wonder, maybe Frajvarn, has he not? He hasn't been revealed as Jules Verne yet at this point. I made a mistake earlier because my notes talk about him being Jules Verne, but that was from my reread. So he's still Frajvarn in this. Everybody still thinks that he's actually an Arbin. They don't know that he's a human from La Terre. Okay. Interesting that the Deolators weren't sacked. So does Javarn truly believe in God? That's what I want to know. Like, I feel like I'm speaking at cross purposes sometimes with this author, because I'm like, does anybody believe in God? I want to know. Especially this alien from La Terre, in other words, Antarct. In other words, aka Earth. So maybe the argument of this story is that one day we will travel to a better place. I don't know if it's like metaphorically or literally, but he thinks Earth can travel to a better place because the people of La Terre did. They got to their Hylian theoric world, which was Arb. And now probably they'll all journey to the next world, which will be hopefully better than Arb. Yeah, they're all in search of the perfect world. Okay. We'll forgive you for not having heard yet what has become an open secret in the last few weeks, that the 3 inviolates are nuclear waste repositories, and as such were probably protected by the secular power. Gosh, I'm like a little bit, this is a little over my head, but I think what they're saying is the places that weren't sacked during the third sack were not sacked because they were protected by the secular power because they were nuclear waste repositories. That's my guess. I've been reading so much about nuclear waste lately. Makes me wonder what Neal Stephenson's idea on nuclear energy is. What he accused Orlo of at the plenary was dead on. Either that, Ayla said, or he changed the past. I didn't laugh. So Lodegear was right. So basically, Lodegear accused Orlo of trying to communicate with the geometers and not telling anyone, basically, by creating a geometric theorem as he was dying before the flood of lava from the volcano killed him. The iconoclastic flow, I forget what the term is, but it was moving super fast. But on the ground, he drew a geometric theorem to communicate with the geometers, basically. And that he tried to communicate with them while he was still in the math with Erasmus. And when Lodegear first said this and planed Erasmus publicly, Erasmus was like, "That's ridiculous." Orlo did not try to communicate with the geometers, but now he's like, actually, he didn't he? He tried to communicate with them. Dun dun dun! The drama thickens, and I love it. As far as I'd been able to make out, he was the only millenarian in the convex, which I thought was interesting. Why is there only one? Why is there only one Jad in the convex? Maybe Rich's theory was because the Thousanders are locked away, what they know is like unknown to the rest of us. We don't know what they know. And so, of course, they wouldn't be called out of the millenarian math by the secular power, because nobody this millennia even knows what they're studying in there, because they have had no apperts since the last millennium. So how could they call people out? Had he deciphered coded messages in the Thousanders' chants? But I didn't want to make a fool of myself. He thought that you have developed a praxis. I can't help but imagine this accounts for your great age. The destructive effects of radiation on living systems are traceable to interactions between individual particles, photons, neutrons, and molecules in the affected organism, he pointed out. Quantum events, I said. Yes, and so a cell that has just undergone a mutation and one that has not lie on narratives that are separated by only a single forking path in hemspace. Aging, I said, is due to transcription errors in the sequences of dividing cells, which are also quantum-level events. Yes, it's not difficult to see how a plausible and internally consistent mythology could arise, according to which nuclear waste handlers invented a praxis to mend the radiation damage and later extended it to mitigate the effects of aging, and so on. So basically, this is explaining how the Thousanders, particularly Fra Jad, have lived for so long, because obviously nobody else can do that. Hello there, guys. I'm back just to finish up. I didn't get all dressed up because I just want to finish so that I can get this video out to you guys. So let's keep going. So there is more to be learned from them than from any others in the convex. So this is a conversation between Fra Jad and Erasmus, and it's before we know who Javarn is, and he's saying the Matterites are like the most important person to talk to at this convex. They know the most. And I'm just like, in retrospect, as I was reading this, again, like rereading it, I was like, he knows. He already knew that the Matterites were actually not humans and that they were aliens. How did he know? It's because he's an incantor. That's gotta be the only solution. That ship is patched together from sub-assemblies built in all four of the packed cosmi. Archibald announced. It is like an archaeological dig. The oldest part is from Pangaea. Very little of it remains. There are only a few odds and ends from Diasp. Most of the ship is made of material from Antarctic and Qatar Cosmi. Of the two, we are fairly certain that Qatar was visited more recently. So this was so interesting because it's just like combining archaeology with aliens, and it's everything that I wanted. Interesting. So long ago, this is my note, the ship started at Pangaea, and I'm like, at this point, why? What was the goal? Something is between them. So the process of discovery is so new wordings in Anathem. I'm not understanding my note here, but they're in two different pens colors, so I can tell my first time through, my second time through. So yeah, I think we do actually learn the motivations, and I already explained them to you. It's because these different alien cultures were looking for the highly entheoric world, and they thought that the next world they meet would be that world every time. They're like, this next world, every new world that they meet is better than the last one that they met. Closer to the perfect world that they are seeking. I'll take your hypothesis under advisement, I said, and weigh it on the steelyard against the alternative, which is that the Matterites are Matterites. So the steelyard, again, is the, basically, Occam's razor. So basically, the simplest solution is the correct one. That's what Occam's razor says in Earth lingo. In their lingo, the steelyard is Occam's razor. And there is a whole story explaining why it's called the steelyard, I think, somewhere in here. But I don't remember what the story was. But basically, yeah, at this point, Archibald is telling Erasmus that his theory that the Matterites are not actually the Matterites at all. They're actually somebody else. And Erasmus is just like, yeah, applying Occam's razor to that is basically, it means that the Matterites are the Matterites. and that's who they are. And that's the simplest solution. So that's the most likely the correct one. And he was wrong. So pretty interesting. Okay, moving on. Oh my gosh, this description of the food of the Matterites is so gross. So gross. Stewed hair with cubes of packing material and shards of exoskeleton or something. The hair seemed to be a vegetable, but what was really troubling Lodegear and the others at the messel was the explosive crunching of the exoskeletons, or whatever they might be, between Javarn's molars. We could actually hear those noises over the speakers. So my thought was like, what kind of food is this if Javarn is from Earth? So we actually had a discussion about it on our live show, because people were like, maybe some kind of seafood pasta was the thought. I forget what, something they said convinced me, but I remember thinking with seafood, you don't actually eat the shells usually of the seafood, so why are they eating the shells? But you do eat like soft shell crab. But is soft shell crab that crunchy when you eat it? I don't know. I've had it before, and I'm trying to remember, was it crunchy or was it like softened by the cooking process? I don't think it was super crunchy. But then we have things like corn nuts, I guess, that are super crunchy. So I don't know. But it says stewed hair. So it's some kind of stew. With shards of exoskeleton in it. It just sounds so gross. I really don't know what they're eating. I can't remember now what we concluded on the live show, but yep, that's interesting. That is some interesting stuff. And my other note, I had another note. Oh no, I didn't. That's a Korean word. I thought I got them all, but I missed one. I'm gonna have to catch this one later. Actually, I'm just gonna pull it out now, so I remember to grab it later. He found his way to a cosmos the same as the one he'd been living in, except that in this cosmos, the bull wasn't scratched. So this was the discussion of somebody on Javarn's planet, Earth, who was able to scratch a bowl just using his mind. He never actually touched the bowl. And so it's him becoming an incanter on Javarn's planet, basically. So pretty interesting. I really did enjoy that story. A redder would... okay. And then either he was a redder or an incanter, blurted Barb, typically. So a redder would change the perception of the past by convincing everybody else that he didn't touch it, I guess, but he actually did, would be the idea. And then an incanter would actually be able to scratch the bowl with his mind, which is what Javarn's world philosopher did. Yeah. Okay, moving on. I am Jules Verne Durand of La Terre, the world which you know as Antarct. Orphan is from the world of Ernud, which you have designated Pangaea. Oh, okay, so Ernud, La Terre, so these are the actual names. Not Pangaea, Antarct, and the other one. Anyway, so La Terre is French for the Earth, and that's why Earth is called La Terre in his world. My mission, assigned to me by the Military Intelligence Command of the Ernud-Tro axis, is to find out whether the legends of the Incanters are grounded in fact. The Ernud-Tro axis, which they call in their language the pedestal, is extremely fearful of this prospect. They contemplate a preemptive strike, hence my questions of the previous evenings, which I am aware were quite rude. So now Javarn has been revealed as not a... he is not from Arb. He is an Earthling. He is a Lateran. Yeah. Okay. You will know of a certain way of thinking about gravity, likely dating to the time of the Harbingers, called by us general relativity. It is the premise that mass energy bends space-time. Geometrodynamics, said Sir Moira. So, different names for the same things we have on Earth. That's like a trend in this book. And I have notes in all throughout this section trying to figure out, is La Terre Earth? I couldn't figure it out at first. They chose to steer a different course, one that was intended to take them into the past of Ernud, where they hoped that they could undo the decisions that had led to the outbreak of the war. But when they reached the end of that journey, they found themselves not in the past of Ernud, but in an altogether different cosmos, orbiting an Ernud-like planet, Tro. So that's the history of how the original Pangaeans, or the Ernudans, discovered that they could travel through space at a fast enough time to actually, be able to do it, because currently space travel, the distances are just too far. There's no way we could actually get a ship to travel that far, that long. They have figured out how to do it. They actually travel to a different cosmos rather than just traveling through time. So I guess the theory is that we could do that one day as well, which would be cool. I was really excited that we were getting explanations about it. This is what I mean. We do get explanations for things, and I enjoyed all of them so much. So that made me very satisfied. We got explanations, so I was happy with those. Neither the Ernudans nor the Troans had the sophisticated understanding of the polycosm that you seem to have developed here on Arb. What is the polycosm again? I know I looked this up, and now I can't remember. I'm just going to look it up again, and you guys are going to hear because I don't remember what I said yesterday. Polycosm. That's just kind of how you have to read it. You're looking up stuff every 2 seconds. Oh, it's not even in here. Okay, well, no wonder I don't know what it is. It's not actually in the glossary. Oh, yeah, just okay. 2 more universes, cosmi, especially when considered as a system that includes the possibility of interactions between cosmi. Oh, okay. It's like a multiverse. No, I didn't read that yesterday. So, basically on on Arb, they already had a certain understanding of a multiverse theory, but these other planets didn't have those until suddenly they stumbled across it. None of your political institutions, none of your religions will survive in their current form. Wars will be fought. Some of your people will be aboard the new version of the ship when it finally moves on to some other narrative. Yeah, so this is what scientists have been like predicting all along, that like Christianity would disappear, for example. Hasn't disappeared, it's just gotten stronger depending on where you live. Yeah, scientists always predict this, but if you believe it is the truth, it won't fade away. But Christianity might look really different to aliens, you know, because Christ came to our planet. So I don't know if there's other planets and aliens, how that would work. They might be under a different dispensation than Earthlings. So yeah, they might know more or different things than we do, like angels, you know. They live under a different dispensation than humans do because they were created by God. They to serve him in that sense. Okay, I'm gonna skip that. All of the yeah. All the dudes who go into space, you know, I was like, why aren't there any women who go into space? But the Veilers were women. It's just they're not actually characters that we know anything about. So I have no connection to these Veiler women. I didn't have a really strong connection to any of the women in this book, if we're being real, except for maybe Cord. We got to know Cord a little better. But for the most, honestly though, none of the characters were like really strong characters, period. It was like more about the ideas, like I said. So that's fine. It's whatever. That the Ernudans began their journey because of events that took place on Arb. Yes. So because the Ernudans, I read these most recently, they saw the vision of the third sack. And so that's what prompted them. They saw what was happening on their Hylian Theoric world, which is Arb. The newcomers then had to be brought up to speed on the first part of this morning's conversation. So the conversation... Oh, did I? Dinosaur. Okay, yeah, sorry. Oh, yeah, I didn't look up the dinosaur in the parking lot thing. That's all that note was saying. I meant to look that up, but so here it is. It all fits together. Fra Clathland of Edhar was the tip of the iceberg. Others back then, who knows how many thousands, worked on a praxis of some kind. Parochians and Halicarnians alike. It is hard to know the truth of what this praxis was capable of. The parking ramp dinosaur hints at what it could do when they made mistakes. We know what the seculars thought of it, how they reacted. The records were destroyed, the practitioners massacred except in the Three Inviolates. There's no telling what people like Fra Jad have been up to since then. I bet they've just been nursing it along. Very interesting. Yes, something about... Yeah, there again. But something about what they did circa 2760 when the praxis reached its zenith sent out a signal that propagated down the wick and was noticed somehow by the Theors of Ernud. So the Theors of Ernud, they somehow got that message about what was going on Arb. But I forgot to like look up because I'm like, what happened? What happened with the dinosaur in the parking ramp dinosaur? I don't know. If y'all know what's going on there, let me know. I totally don't know. Yeah, there it is again. Yeah, then they could just send Prokians. Or Protians? I don't know. Our conversation had begun to draw in others, such as the Veilers, who did not understand Geoffrey's sense of humor. He cleared his voice and called out, "What is happening, my Fra?" That's what it was. It was the yeah. And then the, what is happening, my Fra? I love the audio narrator, the way he says, yeah, what is happening, my Fra? And the way you would say, my dude, here on Earth. That cracked me up. I just enjoyed it so much. I found it cute and funny at the same time as being, like, incredibly mind-bustingly smart. 26 centuries ago, holy crap, I didn't realize how far future this was, to have something that advanced as a really advanced spacesuit 26 centuries ago. So they had spacesuits 26 centuries ago, 2,600 years ago. They had spacesuits. And so that's why their praxis is so advanced. They've just had so many centuries. Okay, what is the Anthropocene? The anthropic principle, excuse me. That was another question that I had that I never looked up. It's like at the top of the book here. Well, it's kind of like the anthropic principle at work, isn't it? I pointed out. If anything had been a little different, you'd be dead. And so you wouldn't have a brain to remember it with. That is as... Archibald said nothing for a while, then sighed. That is as unsatisfactory in That is as unsatisfactory as anthropic arguments usually are. I'd prefer the alternate explanation, which is that I'm not only brilliant, but cool under pressure. It's a little bit... This section, again, was one of those that went over my head. That's why I meant to look it up, what this anthropic principle is. Did I check in the glossary? I don't know. Let me check right now. Nope. Nope. Nothing in the glossary. Okay. I think I see where this is going, I said. I might be dead. You might be dead. Jad might be dead. We've become like Fra Orlo's wandering 10,000-year math, Archibald proclaimed, a causal domain cut off from the rest of the cosmos. So, they're on the spaceship now, and they're getting confused messages from the ground. And the people on the ground are like, how many of you survived the whole mission to space thing? Which was crazy. That was like probably my second favorite part of the book, was the whole mission in space. So interesting how that all happened. And then we have all the world tracks getting confused. It's wild, but it was so exciting and interesting. I loved it. I loved it so much. So my note was, anything can be true at this point. We are just following the successful world path. So there's echoes and memories that some of the characters are having of like failed world paths, because the author wants us to see that those things could have happened and how they could have happened. But we are following the one that is successful. Out of all the ones that failed, we're not following those anymore. In fact, we do follow one that fails later in the book. But ultimately, we end up following the one that succeeds because that makes sense. Of course we would. So yeah, that's the whole concept of the book at the end here. And I'm so here for it. That's what sci-fi does. That's like the whole point, is to explore like these weird ideas that you wouldn't find in like normal fiction. It's a little too weird for your average reader, and that's why I think sci-fi isn't as popular, because it's strange. It's exploring these really novel, unique concepts to the average reader, and it's a little bit too novel, I think, for most people. But for me, it just really is like exactly what I love. As long as it doesn't have the things shooting it in the foot that some sci-fi has. A lot of sci-fi has awful writing about females. This book was totally fine. I really had no complaints about that in this book, and maybe that's partly why I love it so much. So much sci-fi just has these awful female characters, or there's just no female characters, period. But this book, so good on that front. Like, honestly, no complaints. Really good. There weren't as many female characters, but I think that's normal in like science things. It's not that there's no females in science. There absolutely are, but females tend to be in more language-driven and people-intensive work, because women find that really fulfilling, and it makes complete sense why. Women find social fulfillment in jobs, that men don't necessarily look for in a workplace. They're like fine with it just being very tech-heavy. They don't need a ton of a social life to be happy with their work. And that's totally fine. That's like just It's not that there's no gender crossover, but the extreme ends of the spectrum, where you find the most extreme positions are generally male on this side, female on this side. But then when you get to the less extreme ends of the spectrum, you find, it's almost, just as many men and women in the less extreme, but in the most extreme ones, you'll find mostly or all men and mostly or all women, so teaching or nursing versus, I don't know, mining and plumbing, for example, this as an example. My support cell doesn't know how many of us are alive, I announced. Nor does mine, Jestry said immediately. They claim I sent them a message a few hours ago, implying that 2 of us were dead. Did you? No. My support cells sent me no messages at all for quite a long time, said Sur Esma, because they were convinced that I had perished in the launch. So fascinating. This is just my heart rate is raising just reading it. It's so exciting. I don't know. Are you guys feeling that? How exciting that is? I don't know. That was just a total excitement marker. That's why I put a marker there. What? So cool. No, we won't, said Frogratho. Why do you say that? Behold, said oh yeah, okay. But it'll all get sorted out soon, and then we'll stop receiving goofy messages, said Saman. So they're thinking, well, eventually they'll figure out who's alive and who's not, right? And then, no, we won't, said Frogratho. It won't be figured out. Why do you say that? Asked Leo. Behold, said Frogratho, and extended his arm. Following the gesture, we found Fra Jad at work on the wireless box that was our only link to the ground. He was stabbing it with a screwdriver again and again. From time to time, a piece of shrapnel would float away from it, and he would fastidiously pluck it out of space with a skellahand so that it would not wander out from beneath the cold dark mirror and return a radio echo. When he was good and finished, he drifted back to the meeting and jacked himself in. Leo remained calm and waited for him to speak. It's just so emotionally restrained. All of their interactions are just so not emotional. It just cracks me up. Leo remained restrained. Leo remained calm and waited for Jad to speak. The emotions, he doesn't even mention all the emotions that they must be feeling at this moment. It just cracks me up. He plays it really straight. When he was good and finished, he drifted back to the meeting and jacked himself. Jad said, the leakage was forcing choices, the making of which in no way improved matters. Okay, so we were, in effect, locked in a room with a madman sorcerer. That clarified things a bit. I saw Jestry looking my way in his Speely display. This is how the incanter's doing it. He's doing it now. I don't understand that comment, actually, from Jestry. Why is this what incanters do? He just literally destroyed it with a screwdriver. What does that have to do with incanters? My note on this scene was, this scene lives in my brain forever. LOL. Why is it so funny, but also creepy? Why does this make them think incanters, though? That's my question. But then Saman goes on. I'm just going to read the scene because I love it so much and I want to revisit it with you guys. Saman finally broke the silence. It is most odd, he said, sounding strangely moved, but I have been working up the nerve to do the same thing. What, destroy the transmitter? Leo asked. Yes, as a matter of fact. I dreamed a few hours ago I had done it. I felt good about it. When I woke up, I was surprised to find it intact. Why would you wish to destroy it? Archibald asked. So basically, Saman has noticed that people on the ground are spying on them. And anytime they say certain words, their audio is recorded because they're all in spacesuits. So their audio is very easily recorded and sent to the ground. And basically, they do a whole bunch of testing that cracks me up too. The next several pages are just so funny because they start having conversations to test and see what things set it off. So we'll get there in a minute too, and I'll read that because I just died laughing. It was so funny. Emergence. Okay. So basically what they're saying is the people on the ground are spying on them to figure out their allegiances and their loyalties. That's what they want to know because they're doing really dangerous stuff. You know, at this point, they don't realize it yet, but they are carrying the everything killers on them. And so, of course, people on the ground want to know where their loyalties lie. And they also want to know where Javarn's loyalties lie because he's not actually an Arbin. So they're all being spied on. Okay. This is dangerous, Jeshri said flatly. It leads to saying that we may abandon the rake and behave like a bunch of enthusiasts, and everything will work out just fine because we have achieved holistic oneness with the polycosm. So Fra Jad is saying, look at what I did with the Teglon, basically. You can trust me to make the right decision at the right time, I think is the idea. But several of them are having problems with that. That seems like an enthusiastic thing rather than a rational thing to say. Yeah. If we agree to proceed along these lines and reach a point somewhere down the line where a difficult decision needs to be made, what grounds will we have for evaluating possible decisions if we've thrown rational analysis to the wind? The ability to decide correctly at such moments must be cultivated over many years of disciplined practice and contemplation. No one would argue that a novice could solve the Teglon simply by trusting his feelings. Fra Jad developed the ability to do it over many decades. Centuries, Erasmus corrected him, since he saw no benefit now in being coy about this. Erasmus heard a couple of surprised exclamations over the ridicule, but no one said anything for or against the proposition, not even Fra Jad. So yeah, they're working themselves up to kind of trust Fra Jad with some of the intense decision making to come. Oh my gosh, did I not? What? Dang it, I didn't save the conversation. Oh yeah, okay, here it is. Here's the test conversation where they're trying to figure out what words are setting off the spy bots. Okay. Again, we disconnected and formed a two-person link. Do you remember back at Edhar, I began, when we and the other enchanters would sit around after dinner making everything killers out of cornstalks and shoelaces? Of course, Jessry said. Those were really good everything killers because they could assassinate filthy pangendromes like no one's business. That'll come in handy when we betray Arb to the pedestal, I pointed out. So that kind of reveals what the people back home are looking for. As they're spying on the spacemen. So I guess it's more because of the mention of pangendromes, which I'm pretty sure is like kind of secular politician types. But I'm gonna make sure before I say that to you guys. NOP pangendrome. Fra Orlo's pejorative term for a high-ranking official of the secular power. So maybe it's mainly the secular power that's one, creating the everything killers, and two, spying on them. Not really sure. But that conversation, I just died. It was so funny. Okay. Yes, and the others regained consciousness in a world track in which you and I are dead. Dead. That is what I told you. So that's why they left us behind, I said. They didn't leave us behind because in their world track, we never even made it here. Yeah, so this is where things get confusing because they have now landed on the spaceship, and Fra Jad and Erasmus are alone, and the others have left them because in the world track where the others are, they are dead. But in the world track where they are, the others, they're not there anymore. So, and basically, the world track where they are in, and he explains this right after, how about this world track? What are the four of them doing in the narrative that you and I are in? I'm in several, Fra Jad said, a state of affairs that is not easy to sustain. Your questions hardly make it easier, so here's a simple answer. The others are all dead. I do not wish to abide in a world track where my friends are all dead, I said. Take me back to the other one. There is no taking and there is no back, Jad said, only going and forward. I don't want to be in a narrative where my friends are dead, I insisted. Then you have two choices. Put yourself out the airlock or follow me. So I guess the idea is that there's not several world tracks happening all at the same time where everybody is. The idea is only Fra Jad can hop from world track to world track, so he's the one who's guiding them to the right one where they actually succeed. So Fra Jad is living out several of these world tracks at the same time and trying to figure out which one is the right one. That's his job as an incanter. So Fra Jad is just so interesting. I feel like a lot of books would be following Fra Jad at this point. We'd be in his head and not Erasmus's, but I actually really like being in Erasmus's because it makes it very mysterious and it keeps some of the suspense. The fact that Fra Jad is the one who has this power. You just kind of know he's like a sorcerer and you don't know what he can do exactly. And it just gives it this fun feeling to me. Okay. Yeah, let's keep going. We're getting there. We probably have like maybe 20 left. Maybe another 20 minutes. I don't know. We'll see. Something went extremely wrong in my guts. A moment later, I heard the boom of a shotgun. Had I been shot? Not likely given my situation. My vision whited out again, and my viscera caught on fire and melted. They had shot Fra Jad. The everything killers had been turned on. I had become a nuclear weapon. A dark sun spraying fatal radiance onto the dwellings and cultivated terraces of the Ernuden community below. We had accomplished our mission. So apparently I did not save. I think some of my flags must have fallen out here at the end, but there's a point in which they realized that they all swallowed the everything killers except two of them. Fra Jad knew what it was and he neglected to swallow it, which is why he potentially died in some of the world tracks when he was launched into space. That's why he was also not conscious, and that's why he had to be saved as well by Erasmus. Erasmus saves, no, one of them saves Fra Jad. Was it Erasmus? Erasmus saves, I forget, was it anyway, things are getting rusty now because it's been several months since I actually read the whole thing now, but the idea is they're all being tracked and they all have the everything killers that they swallowed except for two of them, and so that's why they had problems on the way up into the spaceship, because two of them didn't swallow the everything killers, which also they were told the reason they swallowed these everything killers, most of them, is because they were told this will monitor your vital signs so that we can like keep your suit like pressurized correctly and stuff like that. And so if they didn't swallow the everything killers and the trackers, basically they couldn't be tracked and their suits couldn't be properly pressurized and all that. So very, very interesting. Why did we live through a failed world track was one of my questions on this, because this was clearly a failed world track where everybody dies because the everything killer was exploded. So everybody on the spaceship, as well as Erasmus and his friends, are all killed. So I was like, why did we live through that? Clearly that's not like the right, but I think it was just showing kind of what was going on with Fra Jad. So it's almost like we did see a little bit of Fra Jad's point of view. And I think the reason we saw it is because he brought Erasmus with him. So that's why he remembers it. If he hadn't brought Erasmus with him to this world track, Erasmus wouldn't remember it. But like, was it Jessary that Erasmus was talking to? Jessary had all these dreams where like There's some, in some of his dreams, you know, Erasmus didn't make it, Erasmus died, and in other dreams, you know, so I think they're all being taken by Fraud Jad throughout all of these world tracks in separate ones, and Fraud Jad is just looking for the best one. He's like, okay, which is the best one that we're going to land with and we're going to keep? And eventually he lands in one where the most people survive. So, oh, it's so interesting just to be in Jad's head for a day, but I think my head would explode if I was in Fraud Jad's head. But this explains why he was so silent while they're all on the spaceship. It's because he's so busy. Oh, I just realized I didn't turn this back on. Sorry. Oh well. I guess we're going without this for now. It explains why Fraud Jad is so silent, because you know when somebody's like looking at their phone and their head like is not in the game, whatever you're talking about or doing, they are not there because they're in their phone. That was Fraud Jad. He was like looking at his phone of all the world tracks and hopping through them and, you know, stuff like that. So really interesting, really interesting. Okay. One of the three another note. So his cowardice didn't save him in the end, but so I think this is that was from a different book. All right. One of the three series of calamities that engulfed most of our Harbinger. One of the series of three calamities that engulfed most of Arb during the last decades of the Praxic Age, and later came to be seen as precursors or warnings of the terrible events. The precise nature of the harbingers is difficult to sort out because of the destruction of records, many of which were stored on syntactic devices that later ceased functioning. But it was generally agreed that the first harbinger was a worldwide outbreak of violent revolutions, the second was a world war, and the third was a genocide. Dictionary 4th edition, AR 3000. So this was interesting because this is part of the terrible events. So this is like all we get about the terrible events. And I really did want more. Like we could have enjoyed a whole book set during the terrible events and it would have been fascinating to me. But it was initially hard to understand how this info could be lost. But now that I think about it, everything is recorded on technology these days. If the technology stopped working, that info could easily be lost. Like if our information got outdated. Like I had a camera that I kept a lot of pictures on, and when I no longer was able to get stuff off of it because the technology was outdated, I lost everything that was on that camera because there was no way to get it off at that point. So it's kind of like that. It makes sense. There's probably a word for that in the tech community. When the Warden of Heaven came to us, it was obvious that he was a fool, a charlatan. We already knew as much, of course, from our surveillance of Arb's popular culture. And the Prague had already devised a plan to draw comparisons between me and this Warden of Heaven, to make his foolishness, his falseness, rub off on me. So the Warden of Heaven was brought here in his spacesuit. He kept wanting to take it off. We advised against it. This is talking about the Warden of Heaven's trip to space, which Jessary took with him, of course, early on, before this mission. So basically, we are hearing now from people on the spaceship. Gon Ordru, which is that like the president? I can't remember who he is exactly, but he's like, yeah, this guy was an idiot. He kept wanting to take his suit off. He said that his God would watch over him and keep him safe, so off came the suit. He became short of breath. Our physicians tried to reassemble the suit around him, but this did not help matters, for he had already suffered the bursting of a major blood vessel. The physicians next tried to put him in a cold hyperbaric chamber, a therapy in which they are well practiced. He was stripped naked and readied for the procedure, but it was too late. He died. A debate followed as to what should be done with the body. While some of us debated, overzealous researchers took samples of his blood and tissues and commenced an autopsy. So the body had already been desecrated, if you will. So this is why he was sent out the airlock without a suit. It's because he was already dead. So, yeah. really interesting to hear about that from their perspective, because it's so different than the perspective on Earth. The perspective on Earth was like, this was like a hostile engagement. They killed our secular religious leader from our... For I had just seen a glimpse of an alternative nature in which we had visited appalling destruction on one of the orbs. So yeah, he's seeing... It's so interesting. He can remember these other world tracks that he went to with Frajad, but they're like a distant memory. It's like he knows, but he's not living them currently. Believe then that information, the Hylian flow, passes between cosmi. That's how the messages were sent. The Hylian flow is sent between different cosmi. I'm finally getting my terminology corrected here. So they're talking, have you learned the power to modulate that signal and to send messages? But Frajad is like, nope, we're not going to talk about this. But Gon Ordru says, I suppose we've already established that, haven't we? You've already gotten inside Prag Eshwar's head somehow. What signal did the third Gon receive 9 centuries ago? Erasmus asked. A prophecy of terrible destruction, robed priests massacred, churches torn down, and books burned. So basically, when they received this vision of the third sack on Ernud, they thought it was from the past on their world. But eventually they figured out that the books, which were written in an unfamiliar script, had geometrical proofs that were unknown to them. And they proved to be right. Later in history, they developed these proofs. And they realized, oh, so this other world already had those proofs. So they realized it was a different world. On Ernud, we had legends of a lost mythic golden age. Prag Eshwar assumed that he was being given a window into that past golden age. But what he was really seeing was the third sack, Erasmus said. Yes, so it seems, said Gon Ordru. So there's the explanation. Much better than I said it earlier. All right. They are really afraid of the Thousanders, the Incanters, and must have noticed that all of the millenarian mats had been emptied out. Where did all of those Thousanders go? What are they cooking up? Then the 200 missile launch. Very upsetting. A lot of data to process. Zillions of bogeys to track. They think they see a ship. It blows up. They think they've dodged a bullet. But a few days after that, out of nowhere comes this horrifying and devastating attack on their biggest strategic asset. For 2 days afterwards, it is all they can think of, and they are word sick about the hostages trapped in the vortex. So this is actually, isn't this, I think, Lodegear explaining this? I don't know, somebody, or no, Ayla. Ayla is explaining the perspective on the spaceship as they were going through all of the events, that we lived through on Arb with our characters. This is the perspective from the spaceship's point of view. But yeah, where did all the Thousanders go? What? I didn't know the Millenarian Mads, the Incanters had been emptied out. What? I did not even remember that. That's crazy. Where'd they all go? What are they doing? For all they knew, there were 100 more of you on the way with more weapons. So the result was they decided to negotiate. Yes, to initiate 4-way talks among the pedestal, the fulcrum, and the magisteria. And the magisteria is the secular power and the mathic world combined. They're now running the world together. So, yeah, that is why the mission was a success on this world track. Thank you, Frajad. It's because they were able to spook everybody on the spaceship, all the geometers, to spook them into making a contract with Earth. So they were not able to do to Arb the same thing that they were able to do to the Troans and the Laterans, us, Earth people, etc. So that was really fascinating. Also, the Magisteria is really similar. There's like a Catholic terminology. Oops, I just realized my phone wasn't charging. Well. Okay. Magisterium. In the Catholic Church, the magisterium refers to the church's official authority entrusted to the Pope and the bishops in union with him. It's essentially the teaching arm of the church, responsible for interpreting and communicating the truths of the faith. I had never heard this term before the other day when I was talking to Faith from Faith and Books, who is a Catholic. So I actually learned that word for the first time. Oh, sorry, I need to plug my phone in. It's gonna die. But I will have to do it later because, oh well. All right, we're moving on. This is such a long video. I'm so sorry. I don't know if I'll be able to do this again, guys. This is really long. And they'll come in handy if we need to change the past. More than we've already changed it, you mean? I returned. I figured we could get away with it since it would sound like routine parochian bashing. Yeah. What will come in handy? Politics and diplomacy. Oh, the Thousanders. Okay, both of Fra Lodegear's companions were Thousanders. So basically, they understand that the Thousanders have changed the past, but not everybody understands that. It's kind of a secret because, like, they all think that Fra Jad is dead. So, like, not Erasmus and his friends. They know that Fra Jad is still alive, but like the Magisteria, they think that Fra Jad is dead because he's like, yeah, he's escaped the dangers. Yeah, so they do not understand what happened here. Only really the people that we know, Erasmus and his team, and several of them died because the Veilers are gone now. The Veilers, the ninjas, are dead. So yeah, not that many people understand what happened here. If it weren't for the fact that we can't eat the food, it would be no more exotic than visiting a foreign country on Arb. He's talking about their experience of the spaceship, the Geometer spaceship. This wouldn't even be any more exotic than visiting a foreign country on Arb. Less so, Archibald said. A foreign country on Arb might be pre-Praxic in some way with a strange religion or ethnic customs, but this place has been sterilized of all that. It's a technocracy. Exactly. And the more technocratic it becomes, the more closely it converges on what we are. So basically they're like, yeah, culture here is not much different. We just can't eat the food. Versus like some places extramuros on our, they're like, that's more foreign to us. So praxis stopped or at least slowed down to a rate of change that could be understood, managed, controlled. Fine, until these guys showed up. For all it, I think this I think must be Fra Lodegear. Is it finally? Maybe, or no, maybe it's Yule. Where is this happening? He raised his head and gazed around. Turns out that all we've been doing was losing the arms race to a cosmi that hadn't imposed such limits on their about. So they're questioning here what the use was of imposing limits and relegating their theors to the maths, basically. Which was a choice that everybody extramuros decided to do after the terrible events, because the theors had created the everything killers. So it's an interesting moral argument, but it doesn't have anything to do with the main character, which is interesting. A lot of times the moral argument has something to do with the main character's choices, but the main character obviously he does not want to cooperate with the everything killers thing. He doesn't want to choose that option, the nuclear option. So they're questioning, we were trying to basically slow our theors down by putting them into the mass, the rest of the world was. But look what happened as a result. These really advanced aliens came and almost conquered us. And look who ends up saving the day. It's the people from the mass. The really advanced theors that end up saving the day against the aliens. So, yeah. What would our world look like if we hadn't relegated them to the maths? I think that's kind of the idea, is in our Hylian theoric world, there would be more of like a renaissance of, praxic age technology. The praxic, anyway, they would be, all the technology and science that they've learned would be just a part of daily living outside extramuros. That would be their Hylian theoric world, as if the Theors were not confined to the maths, and they're teaching, and they're what they've learned, you know, and what the Thousanders have learned wouldn't be confined to the maths. It would be like available to all. If everybody was an incanter, we would never be conquered by aliens. That's the concept. I'm sorry, Lodegear said. There are certain world tracks, certain state of affairs that are only compatible with certain persons being absent. That's the word Fra Jad used before he turned up absent. And then, how about Fra Jad? How about Fra Jad? Any chance he'll be present again? His tragic demise is extensively recorded, said Fra Lodegear, but I'd presume not to say what an incanter is and isn't capable of. So, basically they're talking about Orlo, and if there was any world track where Orlo could have survived. And Fra Lodegear is like, no, unfortunately. In this case, there was no world track where Orlo could have survived and everybody else survived. This was just the best solution for everybody to survive. But I just, all of the conversations where they're trying to keep the Fra Jad's survival a secret crack me up. I love that when they can't state the actual truth. It's funny how they get around it and the humor about it. It reminds me of Rich, reading this with Rich. It's like perfectly Rich's type of humor. Finally, he asked, "Are you going to have descendants?" "It's already happening." Erasmus laughed. "It's already happening. People started getting pregnant during the anti-swarm, which is when everybody left the maths and they went up into space and everything. That was the anti-swarm. Basically trying to not allow the secular power and whoever is in favor of the everything killers to have control. That's the anti-swarm. So basically, Fras and Surs started eating normal food and the men stopped being sterile. So the first devout baby was born last week. I heard about it on the reticulum. So, basically, things are changing. Now thanks to the, what do they call it? What is their Renaissance, their word for the Renaissance, where everybody from the maths can just go out into the world. They have like a certain word for it, I can't remember. It's like the Exodus, their freedom from the maths. He basically is saying now we can have children, and so there are no limits. The possibilities are endless now because there are no limits on our ability to use technology. This is at the very end of the book. We are very close to the end here. The rule of thumb we've been using is that Diolaters are welcome to join like the thinking class as long as they are not certain they're right. As soon as you're sure you're right, there's no point in your being here. But that's so BS to me because there's certain things that they are sure that they're right about. Like what? They all use the steelyard like it's a rule of life, you know? There's like certain things that they've accepted as true. Evolutionary theory. It's been accepted as true even though it's still technically a theory. It's like accepted as true. That's what biological science is based on now. So I think it's garbage that they're like, as soon as you're sure you're right, there's no point in your being here, because scientists are sure that they're right about a lot of stuff. So anyways, yeah. I don't think there's any problem with being sure that God exists and also being a scientist. That's my opinion. And so they talk about some upsites, which are basically insights, which I think is cute, based on Emerson, but I don't really understand it, so I'm just gonna skip over that. If anybody understood what was being said about Emerson there, let me know. He used the occasion to uncork one of his amazing, exasperating sermons, filled with wisdom and upsight and human truths. fettered to a cosmographical scheme that had been blown out of the water 4,000 years ago. So this is one of the kind of cult religious leaders giving a marriage, basically, between Yule and Cord, I think, is who would get married. I don't know. It's like... But basically he gives a sermon that's like really wise, but like wrong on a lot of things. And I'm just like, yeah, I get what you're saying. I get it. Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. And that's the end. That was my last note. We made it. Wow. Thank you guys for doing this with me. This was really fun. I can finally take all these note tabs out and return the book to the library. The other day I had to bring this to the library and Kevin had to hand it in to them and be like, can we renew this? And they were like, oh good, now we don't, when they were able to renew it, they're like, oh good, now we don't have to worry about what would have happened if we couldn't renew it. Kev was like, we would have just had to burn it. So now I can give it back to the library. And thank you, Rich, for getting us all to read this. And thank you to Tiffany and Stephanie for hosting the live shows. It was a blast. I loved it. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!